Hi guys. Tonight we're sailing north, north of comfort, north of sense, north to where the sea itself seems to breathe frost. You stand at the edge of a Norwegian fjord, boots already stiff with ice, and you can hear the hollow thud of waves striking the frozen shore. The sky is a pale bruise of dawn, streaked with copper and lilac, and the wind smells like iron and salt. You watch as a crew of Viking warriors hauls a longship from its mooring. The wood creaks like old bones. The air burns your lungs. You can't help thinking, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time down below. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now, dim the lights. The ship waits for you, its dragon-headed prow carved with frostbitten teeth, its hull glistening with rime. You step aboard, feeling the slick of ice beneath your soles. The world seems silent except for the breath of the sea and the slow grunt of men hauling ropes. Even the ravens circling overhead look too cold to caw. Somewhere in your chest, a tiny, nervous fire tries to light itself. But it won't last long. The Vikings, after all, knew better than to trust open flames at sea. The moment the oars push water, the cold deepens. It's not just the kind that reddens your skin, it's the kind that gets into your bones and weights. Your fingers ache around the railing. You can almost imagine the long, bitter months these men endured. In their time, warmth was treasure, rarer than gold. Every breath of fog from your mouth reminds you, the ocean doesn't care about comfort. The Norse word for this sea have carried layers of meaning. It wasn't just ocean, it meant something like that which devours. Out here, a single misstep could mean your body freezes solid before it sinks. The sailors knew that. That's why they prepared like magicians of survival, crafting clever tricks to cheat the cold. But at this early moment, before any of those tricks are revealed, all you feel is the raw cruelty of the north. The rowers' faces are red and rough, their hair stiff with salt. You notice how their beards clump with frost, each exhale a small cloud. One man rubs animal fat into his cheeks, a glistening, greasy armor. It stinks, but you realize it makes sense. The fat seals warmth inside the skin. Historians still debate whether this was standard practice or a ritual act before setting sail, but it worked either way. The smell of whale oil might cling to the crew for weeks, but at least their flesh didn't crack open from cold wind. The ship itself hums with life. The planks creak, ropes snap taut, and the mast groans as the sail catches the morning gust. Beneath the rhythmic splash of oars, there's the deep, constant sound of the hull cutting water, a heartbeat for this wooden beast. You feel the vibration through your boots. It's strangely comforting, as if the ship itself is alive and warm, even though it's built from pine that freezes as fast as bone. There's no fire on board, not yet. The Vikings understood that fire, so loyal on land, turns traitor at sea. A stray ember could race along a rope, drop into a crack, and in minutes the whole vessel would be a pyre adrift on icy waves. Still, you can tell that warmth is already part of the plan, hidden, portable, clever. These warriors were not fools. They were engineers of endurance. You imagine how they prepared before this voyage. The night before sailing, the crew would have gathered in a smoky longhouse. There, they ate salted fish, smoked lamb, and porridge thick with butter. They filled their bodies with calories like storing sunlight. Maybe they even sang low, steady songs that warmed the chest. Archaeologists have found traces of soot in the grooves of Viking bones, suggesting lives lived close to smoke and heat. But now, at sea, there's none of that. Only the memory of warmth, flickering in your muscles. A gull lands briefly on the stern, then takes off again, as if even it doesn't want to linger here. You glance north, and the horizon looks frozen solid, a strip of white merging into grey. Somewhere beyond that horizon lies trade, raiding, maybe glory, but right now, it's just cold. You start to notice how the men move. No wasted motion. Every pull of the oar seems part of a ritual, as if rhythm itself might keep the blood from freezing. The helmsman, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, watches the sun like a clock. His breath comes out in steady plumes. Every now and then he rubs his hands together and mutters what sounds like a prayer, or maybe just a curse at the frost. In the midst of this quiet struggle, you feel something else. Admiration. These sailors didn't have thermal gear, or heated cabins, or even the idea of comfort. What they had was knowledge, the kind passed down by generations who refused to die. You can almost hear an old voice in your head. Keep moving, keep breathing, and never trust stillness. Because stillness means cold, and cold means death. Some scholars suggest that the Vikings saw cold as a kind of enemy spirit, one you could fight with sweat, effort, and willpower. They believed warmth wasn't just physical, it was moral, even divine. You earned it. Maybe that's why they sailed willingly into seas that froze lesser men solid. The oars lift, dripping. You watch one of the crew crack a smile, his teeth white against his beard. The moment he laughs, a gust of wind catches the sound and shreds it into nothing. But the laughter lingers, just enough to remind you that these men didn't merely survive, they thrived in the cold. They made it part of their identity. The ship turns slightly, catching a stronger wind. The sail billows like a ghost. Around you, everything gleams: ice on ropes, frost on helmets, the wet sheen of breath hanging in the air. Somewhere below deck, water sloshes between barrels. The sound is hollow, rhythmic, hypnotic. You start to feel drowsy, lulled by the endless sway. It's as if the cold has become part of the music. You close your eyes for a second and picture the land behind you, the warmth of the hearths, the smell of pine smoke curling into the rafters, the laughter of those who stayed home. And then, opening them again, all you see is the glittering horizon, the mirror-like sea, and men whose faces have long since stopped flinching from the wind. In this frozen dawn, you finally understand what kind of people these Vikings were. Not merely warriors, but keepers of secret warmth. Their ingenuity will soon reveal itself in wool, in stone, in song, but for now, it's enough to feel the cold in your bones and know they felt it too. The longship groans again, and you pull your cloak tighter. Somewhere, deep below, the sea whispers. The voyage and the mystery of warmth has just begun. The first hour at sea makes you realize the truth about fire. Out here, it is not your friend. Fire on land is a comfort, a hearth, a center, but fire on water is betrayal waiting to happen. You feel the danger every time you imagine a spark leaping from a torch and finding a home in the dry timbers beneath your feet. The ship is built entirely of wood and tar and rope, all of it thirsty for flame. Even a small ember could race through the hull like lightning, and before you could scream, the ship would become a floating funeral. That is why the Vikings learned to live without fire when they were sailing. They respected it the way a warrior respects a sword. It was power, but only if you controlled it. Out on the sea, the only control they had was to keep it away. You can almost picture the early captains explaining this to new recruits. You will crave the hearth, but you must not light it here. It sounds simple, but imagine the temptation. Cold that cuts through fur, wet wind, the endless sound of water, and yet no flame to dry a cloak or thaw stiff fingers. So they learned to use other kinds of heat, quieter ones. The ship itself became a furnace of motion and ingenuity. The crew relied on something called banked heat. You watch as one sailor reaches down to the bottom of the hull and pulls up a handful of sand. The sand is still faintly warm, carried aboard from the fire pit on shore before they launched. It is mixed with ash and tiny black stones. The man grins and presses it to his chest for a moment before letting it fall back. That small touch is enough to bring a hint of comfort. It is astonishing how little warmth a man will thank the gods for when he is freezing. Another trick you notice is how they move constantly. Even when not rowing, they shift their feet, roll their shoulders, or rub their hands together. A Viking at rest was a Viking dying slowly of cold. There is a rhythm to it, almost like a dance. The deck becomes a stage for survival. You join in without thinking, stamping your feet lightly, feeling the wood answer back with dull thuds. Historians still argue about how long these voyages could last before frostbite became unbearable. Some records hint at journeys stretching over weeks, even months, depending on wind and weather. Yet the remains of ships discovered in Norway and Denmark show remarkably well-preserved wood, suggesting constant maintenance and clever design. The Vikings were not reckless, they were meticulous. Every board was soaked in pine tar, every joint fitted tight enough to keep out most of the sea's icy breath. And yet you can sense how fragile it all is. Every creak feels like a warning. The men know it too. Their eyes dart toward the mast whenever a gust hits too hard. They trust the ship, but not completely. It is like sleeping beside a lion. Safety through respect, never through carelessness. As the morning light spreads, you notice something odd about the sail. It seems thicker than ordinary cloth. When you touch it, you realize it has been coated with animal fat. The fabric gleams slightly and feels almost waxy. It is heavy and stiff, but it traps heat. The same coating that keeps water out also keeps a bit of warmth in. The smell is strong and earthy, like old hides and smoke. It lingers in your nose, oddly comforting after a while. You think of how many years it must have taken to learn these tricks. Somewhere in the past, someone must have tried lighting a small fire on deck and paid for it. Someone else must have realized that movement and oil and sand could replace flame. Every survival skill here is written in invisible scars. There is one story the sailors murmur among themselves. They tell of an old crew who tried to bring a small clay brazier aboard during a winter voyage. It worked for a while, glowing softly in the night, giving off just enough heat to warm their fingers. But a single spark caught in the rope of the sail, and within minutes the fire had devoured everything. They say the survivors washed ashore, blackened and speechless. Whether that story is true or not, no one has tested it again. The sea punishes arrogance. You watch your breath form small ghosts in front of your face. Every exhale is visible. You start to count them, as if each one is proof you are still alive. Around you, the crew chants low and steady, a sound somewhere between a hymn and a heartbeat. The oars move in perfect rhythm, slicing through the grey water. The sound of wood and water together has its own warmth, if you listen long enough. At the prow, a carved dragon watches ahead, its frozen eyes fixed on the horizon. It has survived countless voyages, its surface blackened, not by fire, but by time. You imagine the first craftsman carving it, perhaps by a fire that crackled with danger, dreaming of voyages where flame would never be welcome again. You glance toward the helmsman. His face is calm, eyes half closed, as if he is feeling the wind instead of seeing it. His wool cloak is layered, thick and greasy with lanolin. The sheep that gave that wool lived through Nordic winters. Their warmth now becomes his. It is strange comfort, wearing the memory of another creature's survival. There are moments of silence between the gusts, when the sea seems to hold its breath. In those pauses, you can almost hear the creaking timbers whisper secrets. The ship speaks a language of warmth and risk. You realize that every decision on board balances between freezing and burning. No fire means safety from destruction, but also endless cold. It is a fragile truce, one the Vikings mastered. Some archaeologists believe they sometimes carried small heated stones wrapped in thick sealskin, used briefly to warm hands or food. Others think that was impractical on a moving vessel. The debate remains unresolved, which seems fitting. The sea keeps her secrets. As the day goes on, you find yourself growing accustomed to the cold. It still hurts, but you begin to understand its rhythm. Your breath slows, your body tightens, your awareness sharpens. There is something meditative about it, like sitting too close to danger and refusing to blink. The crew seems to feel it too. They are quiet, focused, almost reverent. The absence of fire is not just caution, it is philosophy. For them, warmth comes not from flame, but from life itself. Movement, breath, muscle, faith. You see it in their eyes, in the way they keep each other awake with jokes and muttered songs. Fire is not gone, it has simply moved inside them. As the sun starts to lower again, the light softens, turning silver against the water. The dragon head gleams faintly. Somewhere far behind, on land, the hearths still burn. But here, aboard this ship, warmth exists only as willpower and memory. You pull your cloak tighter and try to imagine what tomorrow will bring. You notice how the crew seems to live inside their clothing, as if the layers themselves are armor against a world made of knives. Every stitch matters. Every fiber is chosen with the kind of wisdom that comes only from necessity. Wool is their miracle, and you start to understand why. When you rub your sleeve between your fingers, it feels rough, oily, and alive. That oil is lanolin, a gift left by the sheep that once wore it. It repels water and traps heat even when soaked. In this cold, that means survival. You imagine the hands that spun the yarn, the women in dim halls working by firelight, twisting thread that would one day travel across icy seas. Each garment carries not just warmth but connection. The tunic that now hugs your shoulders might have been woven by someone's mother or wife, each loop a quiet prayer that her sailor would return home alive. The wool smells faintly of smoke and salt, a blend of land and sea. As the ship drifts deeper into open water, the wind becomes sharper. The men draw their cloaks tighter, hoods pulled over their brows. They look like a moving wall of fur and shadow. You can hear the rasp of wool rubbing against wool, a soft rhythm beneath the slap of waves. There are no spare movements here, only small adjustments that mean everything. One man ties the hem of his cloak around his waist to stop drafts from creeping up. Another pulls thick mittens from under his belt, stitched from seal skin with the fur turned inward. When he flexes his fingers, you hear the faint crackle of stiff leather warming in his palm. Historians believe the Vikings layered their clothing deliberately. The first layer was thin and soft, meant to breathe and wick moisture. Over that came dense wool or fur, heavy enough to trap body heat. Some even wore cloaks woven in two directions, a double weave that could block wind like armor. There are surviving fragments of such textiles found in burial mounds, still faintly oily after 1,000 years. That fact alone tells you how well it worked. A sailor beside you pulls back his hood and grins, revealing a face red from wind but shining with confidence. He points to his cloak and says a few words that roughly mean, "My second skin." You laugh, and he nods knowingly. To these men, clothing was not decoration, it was technology. The difference between life and death was measured in thread count. Then comes the smell of fur. A thick, musky odor clings to everything. It is unpleasant at first, but then it begins to feel grounding, like the scent of the earth itself. The men wear furs of bear, fox, wolf, and sometimes dog. These are not trophies, but tools. The pelts drape over shoulders, adding another barrier between flesh and frost. Each fur carries its own story. One might have come from a hunted animal in Greenland, another traded from a Sami trapper hundreds of miles north. You realize the Viking world was a network of survival knowledge stretching across icy continents. There is a strange beauty in their practicality. You watch as one man takes off his cloak, shakes out the frost, and wraps it again tightly around his torso, tucking the edge under his belt. He does it with the precision of a craftsman, as if adjusting a weapon. You try it yourself, and immediately feel a little warmer. It is remarkable how simple acts can restore comfort in a place that seems designed to take it away. Somewhere near the mast, a younger sailor adjusts the lining of his boots. He has stuffed dried grass between his socks and the leather, a trick passed down for generations. The grass traps air, keeps moisture away, and insulates like wool. Archaeologists have found such remains in graves and ship burials, still intact. It seems almost too humble a solution for such fierce conditions, but that is what makes it genius. There are arguments among scholars about how colourful Viking clothing really was. Some say it was all earth tones, natural and practical. Others insist they used bright dyes, even for sea voyages, believing color lifted morale. You can imagine either possibility, muted browns and greys blending with the fog, or flashes of deep red and golden yellow shining like small fires in the gloom. Perhaps it depended on the man, on the day, on how much sunlight his spirit needed. As afternoon drifts into pale dusk, you realize how quiet the sea has become. The men's breaths form little clouds that rise and vanish. Each exhale is recycled warmth, shared by the group. One sailor even jokes that they should stop talking so their heat does not escape. Everyone laughs, their voices low and husky. You feel that laughter too, like a spark flickering through your ribs. You think about how warmth has always been communal. No one survives cold alone. Even now, centuries later, you can sense that truth. The wool on your body holds the memory of human hands. The fur on your shoulders carries the life of an animal. The ship beneath your feet holds the heat of trees cut and shaped by craftsmen. Everything that keeps you alive once lived and breathed. A gust of wind strikes suddenly, carrying a spray of salt that stings your cheeks. The men tighten their grips on the oars, hunching forward, heads bowed. You feel the layers around you tighten too, sealing in your small pocket of warmth. In that moment, you understand how the Vikings could survive in places where most people would freeze within hours. Their clothing was not just protection, it was partnership with nature itself. They took the gifts of wool and fur, oil and hide, and turned them into living armor. When the wind finally calms, you look around and see faint smiles of relief. The youngest sailor leans back and hums a short tune, something that sounds half lullaby, half prayer. The others join softly, voices blending with the creak of the ship. The melody is slow, circular, almost hypnotic. It reminds you that warmth is not only physical, it can be made of sound, of breath, of togetherness. The sky turns darker now, the color of slate and smoke. Stars begin to emerge, faint pinpricks of light over the endless grey sea. The air feels colder, sharper, but somehow it bothers you less. Wrapped in wool, surrounded by life and motion, you feel like part of a breathing organism made of men, wood, and hope. For a moment, you close your eyes. You can still feel the gentle rasp of fabric against your skin, the weight of fur around your shoulders, the pulse of the ship moving beneath you. Somewhere in that rhythm, you realize you are warm, not from fire but from everything that lives. You begin to notice a strange preparation happening near the bow. A few men gather around a large barrel filled with smooth river stones. They are grey and round, each one polished by water and time. Before setting sail, these stones were heated in a pit of embers on the shore until they glowed faintly red. Now, hours later, they still hold their warmth like small hearts. The sailors handle them carefully, wrapping each in layers of clay or thick cloth soaked in seal fat. When they place one at their feet, you feel the faint radiation of heat spreading outward, subtle but real. It feels like standing near a sleeping animal. According to early Norse records, crews sometimes prepared these fireless hearths before embarking on winter voyages. They heated stones or bits of iron, sealed them, and carried them aboard as living warmth that could not escape. It sounds almost mythical, but archaeologists have found blackened pebbles in ship remains, the kind that only exposure to intense heat could produce. That discovery gives weight to what old stories called soul stones, objects that held warmth as though a spirit lived inside them. Curiously enough, some accounts describe sailors pressing these stones against their stomachs before sleeping, believing the heat would keep their courage strong. It is a detail that feels both practical and superstitious. Like most Viking habits, the line between science and magic was thin when the wind screamed across the ice. As the ship rolls through the waves, one of the crewmen passes a warm bundle to another. The second man unwraps it slightly, sighs with relief, and places it beneath his cloak. You catch the faint scent of seal oil, rich and heavy. It lingers in the air, mingling with the sharper notes of salt and tar. The smell is unpleasant but reassuring. It means the heat has not escaped. There is also a metal container sitting near the mast, shaped like a small pot with holes on the lid. A faint haze drifts from it, and you realize it must hold something burning inside. Perhaps a mixture of peat or dried moss smouldering low enough not to flare into flame. Some researchers believe these small ship braziers were real, though fragile and rare. The evidence is fragmentary, and no one has found one intact, but the possibility remains. It would have been madness to light open fire on a wooden ship, yet necessity breeds invention. You crouch beside the pot, feeling a ghost of heat brushing your fingers. It is so mild that you wonder if it is only your imagination. The sailor guarding it grins and tells you to keep your distance. He taps the pot's lid and mutters that it has already eaten enough air for one day. His words sound like ritual. You begin to suspect that this small source of warmth is treated less as an object and more as a living creature, something that must be respected, fed, and never angered. Not far away, another man sharpens his iron tools, and you notice the blades steaming faintly in the cold. He explains that before sailing, they heated their weapons briefly by the fire and coated them in oil. The warmth was not just for comfort. It helped prevent rust and made the metal less brittle in freezing air. The gleam of the iron catches the pale light, glowing with a life of its own. You wonder if part of the Viking fascination with blades came from this small miracle, steel that seemed to breathe warmth back at its maker. Some modern metallurgists point out that Viking smiths used a combination of high-carbon steel and wrought iron, which could retain heat for longer than most common metals of the age. It is one of those facts that turns admiration into awe. These people did not just fight the cold, they mastered it with skill and creativity. The smell of heated metal mixes with salt air, and you can almost taste it on your tongue, like blood and sea combined. You start to see why warmth was never simply a matter of temperature for the Norse. It was symbolic, almost sacred. The difference between life and death, between courage and despair, could be measured in a single glowing stone. There is one story whispered among the crew that captures this belief. It tells of a warrior who carried a stone from his home hearth wherever he went. He believed it held the spirit of his ancestors. During a storm, when frost threatened to take his fingers, he clutched the stone and swore he felt it beating like a heart. When the storm cleared, the stone was cold again, but he was alive. Some take it as proof that belief itself can produce heat strong enough to fight the elements. Others call it a myth shaped by desperation. Even now, experts cannot agree whether these practices were common or exceptional. Some think they belong to specific clans with access to certain materials. Others suggest that every crew experimented, mixing practical wisdom with superstition. The lack of written instruction leaves it open, which feels fitting. The Viking way was always to learn through doing, to survive by improvising. As daylight fades, the temperature drops sharply. The stones on deck lose their warmth, one by one. The men rotate them, tossing the cooler ones into a bucket of brine to hold for later, preserving them as ballast. You can see how the process itself keeps everyone busy, bodies moving, minds focused. The act of tending heat becomes a ritual of endurance. You kneel to touch one of the used stones. It feels smooth and faintly warm, like the last pulse of something dying. You imagine the fire that once lived inside it, glowing in the dark pit hours ago, a fire that traveled with you across the sea. There is poetry in that. A flame transformed into stone so it could follow men where fire dared not go. Night gathers fully now, and the stars return, bright and sharp as frost. The ship's pace slows as the wind shifts, and a calm settles over the deck. The men huddle closer, each clutching a stone or pot or memory of warmth. The ocean whispers around the hull, cold and endless. Yet here, surrounded by these strange inventions and stubborn lives, you feel the faint promise of survival glowing quietly between your hands. By the second night at sea, the crew begins to construct something remarkable at the heart of the ship. You first notice them piling sand into a shallow pit lined with flat stones. It looks out of place, a small patch of earth on a vessel made for water. The men handle it with reverence, scooping the sand from sealed sacks, pressing it into shape with thick, calloused hands. The texture of the sand absorbs light and sound alike, turning that small circle into the quietest place on deck. According to fragments of early Norse sagas, some ships carried a kind of hearth made from sand, clay, and stone. The sailors called it eldgroff, the hollow of fire. It was small, shielded from the wind, and used sparingly. The goal was never to blaze but to glow, a whisper of warmth instead of a flame. Archaeologists have unearthed bits of scorched sand and charcoal in shipwrecks that might confirm this. The evidence is faint, but the possibility stirs the imagination. The men finish shaping the pit, then lower a clay vessel into its center. Inside it sits a cluster of coals stolen from the bonfire they left behind on the shore that morning. The glow is faint but steady, like a buried sunset. You watch the first wisp of smoke curl upward and vanish into the freezing air. For a moment, everyone is silent. The ship seems to hold its breath. The helmsman mutters a short blessing. It is not a prayer to avoid fire. It is a plea for balance. The Vikings lived with contradictions, and this is one of the greatest. They feared flame, yet they depended on it. The tiny hearth becomes a symbol of that tension. Too much heat would kill them, too little would freeze them. You can feel the respect in every movement. It is strangely moving to see how this fragile ember transforms the mood of the crew. Faces soften, shoulders loosen, and conversation begins again. Someone passes around a small pot of dried fish softened in seawater. Another opens a pouch of coarse salt. The warmth, though slight, has opened their appetite. You realize that the body responds not just to temperature, but to hope. Some surviving accounts from later medieval sailors mention similar practices, describing how crews built sand pits for heating tar or softening metal. It may be that the Vikings pioneered this trick long before anyone wrote it down. The idea is simple but brilliant. Sand diffuses heat, preventing sparks and shielding the wood beneath. Even a few glowing embers could provide comfort if carefully contained. A curious detail comes from one of the Icelandic sagas, which claims that captains tested their crew's discipline by maintaining such a hearth during storms. The men had to protect it without letting it flare or die. The story might be exaggerated, yet it speaks to the Viking obsession with control. Fire was not just a tool, it was a test of will. The glow flickers as the ship rocks gently. You kneel beside the hearth, feeling its faint warmth brush your face. The air smells of ash and salt, not unpleasant, just real. The sensation is grounding. It connects sea and land, danger and safety. You imagine how many nights sailors must have sat like this, staring into a glow that reminded them of home. One of the older men tells a tale about fire spirits that live in the sea, called Eldalfar. According to him, if you treated fire with respect, these spirits guided your ship safely through fog and storm. But if you mocked them or wasted heat, they would steal it from your bones. The others laugh softly, but they do not interrupt. Superstition on a Viking ship is less about belief and more about respect for the unseen. The pit radiates a mild warmth that seeps into your boots. It is enough to make your toes tingle instead of ache. Around you, the men settle into a rhythm of quiet work. Some mend ropes, others sharpen tools. A few simply close their eyes and rest, trusting that the tiny hearth will keep watch for them. It is remarkable how a glow no larger than a handful of embers can hold so many lives together. Modern researchers studying Viking ships have debated whether this kind of hearth was ever used during long voyages. Some argue it was too dangerous, that the constant motion of the sea made any open heat source suicidal. Others insist that human ingenuity finds a way, and that the small size of these pits made them manageable. The truth probably lies somewhere between caution and necessity. You reach your hand out again, hovering above the warmth. The air above it trembles like a mirage. You feel both gratitude and fear. Gratitude because warmth still exists, and fear because you know how easily it could escape. The balance between safety and disaster feels delicate, but the crew seems calm. They have rehearsed this dance for generations. As the night deepens, a soft snow begins to fall. The flakes melt before they touch the pit, evaporating in tiny bursts of steam. The sound is so faint that you almost imagine it. Each hiss feels like a whisper from another world. You can smell the faint sweetness of burnt wood mixed with sea air. The combination feels ancient, timeless, like breathing history itself. The helmsman finally speaks, his voice low and hoarse. As long as the glow lives, so do we. The words sink into the air like a promise. Around him, heads nod silently. You can see the reflection of the emberlight in their eyes, small but fierce. That glow is more than heat. It is defiance. When the last watch is set and the crew settles to rest, the hearth is covered with a flat lid of stone to keep it from flaring. The faint light seeps through the cracks, casting moving shadows across the deck. You lie down with your cloak pulled tight and listen to the wood sigh beneath you. The warmth drifts upward, barely enough to notice, but enough to keep you dreaming. Above, the stars blur behind falling snow. Below, the ember still glows. Somewhere between those two worlds, a ship sails on, guided by a hearth that dares to burn without fire. By morning, the hearth has cooled to silence. The sand is grey now, the last hint of warmth long gone. Yet the crew looks more rested than before. They have discovered another kind of fire, one that does not flicker or fade. It lives in their bodies. You watch them stir from sleep, stretch their arms, and stamp their feet on the deck to wake the blood. There is laughter, coughing, the soft sound of hands slapping shoulders in greeting. Heat, it turns out, is something that can be shared. Some accounts from medieval chronicles describe how Viking sailors relied on each other for warmth more than any tool or invention. They called it manvarmi, the heat of men. It was both literal and symbolic. The simplest way to survive the night was to lie close together, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in cloaks and furs, turning the air between them into a small pocket of life. It might sound crude, but in temperatures that could freeze breath to beards, there was no shame in survival. A few researchers have suggested that these nightly huddles formed the basis of Viking solidarity. The bond forged in the cold was stronger than any oath sworn on land. When you have kept each other alive through a frozen night at sea, loyalty stops being an idea and becomes a physical truth. You can almost feel that truth now, as you sit among them, cloaks brushing, boots knocking, the rhythm of shared breath blending into the creak of the hull. The men joke about the smell. Sweat, seal oil, fish, and smoke all mixed together. One sailor grins and calls it the scent of brotherhood. You cannot help but laugh with them, because there is something freeing about it. Dignity has no use here. Comfort comes from acceptance, not perfection. The warmth of another human body is more precious than gold. Curiously, a few burial finds suggest that this closeness extended even into ritual. Archaeologists have uncovered graves where two men were buried side by side, wrapped in the same cloak. Some interpret it as friendship beyond death, others as a symbolic echo of these shared nights. Whatever the reason, the image feels right. The Vikings carried their warmth together, even into the next world. You watch them move as they prepare for another day of rowing. Before taking their places, they rub their hands together briskly, clap their arms across their chests, and stamp their feet in rhythm. The sound builds like distant drums. It is both practical and ceremonial, waking muscles and spirits alike. One man shouts a brief verse in Old Norse, something about fire living in blood. The others reply in unison. Their voices vibrate in the cold air like a chant. According to surviving poetry, Viking warriors often described courage as heat. The same word that meant warm could also mean brave. It is an idea that feels beautifully logical here. To be warm is to live, and to live is to dare. In the frozen north, temperature and spirit are one and the same. There is another layer to this idea, one that makes you pause. Some folk traditions claim that men who grew too fond of isolation risked freezing even when wrapped in furs. They said loneliness could steal your warmth faster than wind. That belief might sound poetic, but as you watch the men joke and sing, you start to believe it. Connection itself seems to generate heat. One sailor, younger than the rest, shivers uncontrollably despite his layers. The others do not scold him or laugh. Instead, two men pull him between them, wrapping him in their cloaks until his shaking slows. One of them mutters, "Share your fire, or we all go cold." It is both advice and law. You feel the kindness in it, rough and instinctive. These people have no luxury of cruelty. Their empathy is forged by necessity. Modern physiologists would explain this with body heat transfer. Pressing close reduces heat loss through convection, letting each person conserve energy. But science alone cannot describe what it feels like. The warmth shared here carries something deeper, a memory of home, of longhouses, and sleeping by familiar faces. It transforms the deck of a warship into a fleeting family. In the lull between strokes, one of the men begins to hum. The sound is soft, almost a vibration more than a song. Others pick it up. The tune weaves through the group, slow and steady, following the rhythm of breath. It is not for entertainment, it is for unity. You realize the song itself is a kind of fire, kindling courage and warmth from within. There are no written notes, no instruments, only the rise and fall of voices. It feels ancient, older than words. Some ethnomusicologists who study Nordic traditions believe these chants helped synchronize physical exertion and keep spirits high. They even speculate that prolonged group singing could slightly raise core temperature through continuous breathing and motion. It seems unlikely, but then again survival has always turned unlikelihood into fact. The sea remains cold, but something has changed. The deck feels less hostile, the air less sharp. Perhaps it is illusion, or perhaps the human body has learned to adapt. You feel your own pulse steadying with the rhythm of the crew. Each shared breath feels like a spark passed from person to person. The sun peeks through a break in the clouds, spilling pale light across the ship. The warmth on your face is faint, but it joins with the warmth of the group. Together they form something powerful. The Vikings did not need a blazing hearth or roaring flame. They carried the heat of life in their lungs and hearts. When the chant fades, silence fills the air, gentle and complete. You realize that the cold has become a teacher, not an enemy. It has shown these men what truly matters: movement, laughter, presence, togetherness, the kind of heat that cannot be burned away. You lean back, your shoulders brushing against the man beside you, and for the first time since leaving the shore, you stop thinking about survival. You are part of a living furnace built of trust, breath, and will. The ship creaks softly, and the sea sighs beneath it. Somewhere deep inside, the fire of life keeps burning. The morning fog lifts, revealing a quiet that feels both beautiful and cruel. Frost glitters across the ropes like tiny shards of glass. The air bites your face each time you inhale, yet there is a warmth that surprises you. It comes not from the sand hearth or the fading stones, but from something moving, breathing, and alive. At first, you think it is your imagination until you hear the unmistakable sound of hooves on the deck. A small goat, woolly and stubborn, pushes past your leg. Its breath puffs little clouds into the cold air. A sailor chuckles and tosses it a piece of dried moss. Behind it, two dogs lie curled together near a pile of spare oars. One opens an eye, then goes back to sleep, tail twitching. You realize the Vikings have brought animals aboard, not just for food or trade, but for companionship and warmth. According to several Norse accounts, it was common for longships to carry animals, especially during lengthy voyages. Goats provided milk, dogs served as guards, and sometimes even sheep or small pigs shared space on deck. The heat of these creatures, combined with the smell and the noise, turned the ship into a floating farm. It might sound chaotic, but it made perfect sense. In a world without heaters, fur and breath were currency. Curiously, There are stories of captains who grew attached to their animals, treating them as lucky charms. One saga mentions a goat named Snorri who survived a shipwreck by climbing onto a floating plank. When rescued, he was supposedly crowned with a silver collar and never slaughtered. Whether that story is true or embroidered over time, it captures the affection these sailors felt for the living warmth that shared their journeys. The goat near you sniffs your boot, then bleats softly. Its body radiates a steady heat that feels miraculous. You crouch down and run your hand through its coarse fur, feeling the lanolin-rich texture similar to wool clothing. The scent is sharp and earthy, but beneath it lies a sense of safety. The animal looks at you as if to say, "I am alive. Therefore you are too." Some researchers believe the Vikings placed animals strategically within the ship, clustering them near sleeping areas or beneath temporary shelters. The combined warmth of men and beasts could raise the temperature a few degrees, enough to make the difference between numbness and rest. It may not sound like much, but when survival depends on every heartbeat, a few degrees matter more than comfort. A sailor nearby starts milking one of the goats, his breath forming clouds around him. The milk steams faintly as it hits a wooden bowl. He passes the bowl to you. The liquid tastes sour and wild, but it spreads heat through your chest like a slow ember. You cannot help but smile. The warmth of another creature has become nourishment. One of the older crew members begins telling a tale, half memory, half legend. He says that during a brutal winter, a ship once carried 2 wolves as offerings to a northern chieftain. When the storm came and the fire failed, the wolves' body heat kept half the crew alive. Some say they even howled into the wind as if challenging the storm itself. The man shrugs after finishing, saying it might be nonsense, but no one laughs. You suspect they all want to believe that courage itself can be contagious. Another sailor, tending to one of the dogs, hums quietly. The sound seems to soothe the animal, which rests its head on his knee. He explains that dogs, with their quick warmth and loyal nature, were considered sacred companions of warriors. The god Freya was said to ride with cats, but seafarers often invoked protection from Thor or Njord through the presence of dogs. The bond between man and beast was spiritual as well as practical. The deck smells of wet fur and salt, a mixture that would make anyone unused to it wrinkle their nose. But to you it smells like life. In this cold void of wind and water, the scent of a living creature is proof that the world still breathes. The animals move between the men freely, heads brushing against knees, hooves clattering softly. Each touch is a reminder that warmth is not only human. Some historians have puzzled over how the crew managed waste and space with so many creatures on board. The likely answer is simplicity. The Vikings accepted mess as part of living. Cleanliness was a luxury, reserved for calm waters and warm days. Out here, survival trumped comfort. A dirty ship that stayed afloat was better than a tidy one that froze. As the day unfolds, the animals settle into a rhythm with the men. The dogs stretch beside the oarsmen, matching their movements. The goats nibble on leftover hay tied in bundles near the bow. When the wind rises, they press close to the men for shelter, and the men lean into them for warmth. It is a strange harmony, but it works. You think of how modern travelers bring blankets or heaters. These sailors brought heartbeat and breath. The ship becomes a floating ecosystem, balanced between chaos and calm. You close your eyes and listen. The splash of water, the creak of wood, the soft snort of an animal, the low hum of human voices. Together they create a symphony of survival. It occurs to you that warmth, at its core, is always shared. Whether it comes from another person or another species, it exists only in connection. The Vikings understood that instinctively. They did not see animals as mere cargo, but as partners in endurance. When the sea turned cruel, life recognized life, and that recognition became heat. The sun sets again, painting the water in pale gold. The animals shift closer to the center of the ship, where the air is stillest. You rest your hand on the goat's back one more time, feeling its slow heartbeat beneath your palm. The warmth seeps into you, steady and ancient. In this moment, you realize the Vikings never truly sailed alone. They carried an ark of warmth, stitched together from wool, breath, and life itself. By the next day, the sea grows heavier, and the air tastes like iron. Frost gathers on the ropes again, this time thicker, forming white veins across every surface. The men move carefully, boots sliding on the glazed deck. Yet something new fills the air, a scent that makes you pause. It is strong, greasy, and oddly sweet, like a mix of salt and old candles. The sauce is everywhere. The sailors are rubbing their hands, faces, and even the wooden edges of the ship with a thick, shimmering oil. According to preserved tools and residue found in Viking settlements, that smell likely came from seal fat or whale oil. Both were invaluable to northern sailors. These substances burned slowly, resisted freezing, and sealed wood against moisture. More than that, they were warmth you could touch. When smeared on skin or cloth, they created an invisible barrier that trapped heat. It was messy, but it worked, and in the Arctic wind, that mattered far more than dignity. One sailor dips his fingers into a clay pot and spreads the oil over his face. It glistens in the pale light, forming a shiny mask. He looks like a statue carved from amber. Then he hands you the pot, gesturing for you to try. The oil feels thick and cold at first, then warmer as it soaks in. Your skin tingles. The smell is heavy but oddly comforting, like smoke that clings after a long fire. Old Norse poetry sometimes referred to the sea as a creature with teeth, biting and devouring the careless. The men around you seem to coat themselves as if armoring against that bite. Each movement is slow and deliberate. They rub the oil into their hair, their beards, the seams of their boots. Some even polish the inside of their helmets with it, muttering that a warm head keeps a sharp mind. It is both ritual and routine, a daily armor of grease. Curiously, whale oil also served another purpose. When poured into small stone bowls with twisted moss wicks, it burned with a dim, steady flame. The light was golden, almost liquid in appearance, and it gave off just enough warmth to thaw a hand or heat a bit of food. A few fragments of such lamps have been found in coastal grave sites, suggesting that this simple tool accompanied Vikings from life to death. The thought adds a quiet dignity to the smell now surrounding you. You watch as one of the older men lights a small lamp, sheltered behind a curved wooden plank. The flame wavers but holds. It dances low, barely visible, as if too shy to compete with the icy daylight. The men gather around it, not too close, just enough to feel its faint breath. The glow touches their faces, giving them a ghostly warmth that looks more spiritual than physical. Some experts think these lamps were used sparingly, mostly during still nights or fog, when the wind could not snuff them out. The fuel was precious and difficult to replace, so every drop was guarded carefully. Others doubt the lamps could have survived on a moving ship, calling the idea impractical. The argument remains unresolved, yet the image of that tiny flame feels too right to dismiss. The Vikings were not careless dreamers. They were experts in endurance. A younger sailor stirs a pot near the lamp. Inside is a mixture of fish scraps and oil, a kind of paste that thickens as it warms. He spreads a bit onto hard bread and passes it around. The taste is strange, oily and rich, but it fills your stomach like a furnace. You understand then that warmth does not only come from the outside, it can start deep within, carried by what you eat. The ship creaks, its planks now slick with protective grease. The smell of oil seeps into everything, into hair and wool and even the ropes. Some might find it foul, but the men treat it as the scent of safety. The dogs lick their paws, coated from lying too close to the coated boards. Even the goat's fur glistens faintly in the dim light. A fragment of an Icelandic saga mentions sailors rubbing seal oil into the sides of the ship before a storm, claiming it made the vessel slide like a seal through the waves. Whether this was poetic exaggeration or a real practice, it captures the imagination. You can see how belief might intertwine with technique. To the Vikings, nature was not an enemy but a teacher. If seals thrived in the cold, Why not imitate them? As the evening deepens, the small lamp flickers again. The wind howls softly around the hull, carrying flakes of ice that shatter against the mast. The men crouch near the flame, silent now. Each of them watches the pool of oil feeding the fire, the way it ripples with the ship's motion. There is reverence in their stillness. The light reflects in their eyes like molten gold. One sailor whispers that this kind of fire cannot be angered. He calls it shoulderer, sea fire, a flame born of water's creatures, meant to travel without fear. The others nod. You sense that for them, this tiny light is more than warmth. It is balance, a sign that even the frozen sea holds its own kind of mercy. When the lamp finally sputters out, no one rushes to relight it. They sit in the dark, letting the glow fade from memory. The air feels colder, but hearts are steadier. The smell of oil lingers long after the light dies, heavy and protective, like the presence of something ancient watching over them. You lean against the railing and breathe it in. The ocean glimmers faintly under the moonlight, black and endless. The ship rocks gently, coated in its strange armor of oil and faith. In the mingled scents of whale, salt, and smoke, you catch the essence of Viking ingenuity, warmth drawn from the bodies of beasts, carried through storms, defying the cruelty of cold. The next morning brings stillness so complete that it feels eerie. The wind has vanished, leaving the sea flat and shining like dark glass. The silence should be peaceful, but instead it feels heavy, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The crew moves slowly, their voices low. The temperature drops without the wind, turning the air thick and unmoving. Your breath hangs before you like smoke from an invisible fire. Today the men begin a new task. They unfold large sheets of material, dark and heavy, and start stretching them across the open parts of the deck. At first you think they are repairing the sail, but the cloth is too coarse, too thick. Then it clicks. They are building shelter. According to old Norse boat descriptions and fragments of skin found near ancient harbour sites, Viking ships sometimes carried removable coverings made of canvas, hides, or woven wool. These could be draped over poles to form a low tent over the central deck. It was a simple idea, but one that turned a vessel into a floating cabin. You watch the men work with quiet efficiency, lashing cords, tying knots, adjusting corners until the material sags in a perfect arc. The first sheet goes up, then another, overlapping like scales. The hides are a patchwork of colours, brown and grey with pale streaks of fur still visible. Some are reindeer skin, others seal skin or even pieces of old sail coated with oil. When they are all secured, the ship feels different. The wind no longer cuts through your cloak. The sound of the sea dulls. For the first time since leaving shore, there is something close to a roof over your head. A faint warmth builds beneath the covering almost immediately. It is not fire's warmth, but the kind that collects from breath and movement. The air smells of animals, tar, and wool. It is thick but safe. The condensation from so many lungs forms droplets that cling to the inside of the hides. They sparkle faintly in the dim light, like trapped stars. A few archaeological reconstructions of longships have tested this idea, and the results were surprising. Even a small enclosure over part of the deck can raise the temperature by several degrees, enough to thaw fingers and keep frost from forming on bedding. It is an elegant solution for a people who respected danger, but never surrendered to it. One sailor sits near the edge of the tent, repairing a tear in the hide with bone needles. The rhythm of his hands is hypnotic, slow and deliberate. He hums a tune as he works, the same one you heard when they rowed. The song drifts through the air, mixing with the steady creak of wood. You realize that sound itself feels warmer in this space. It wraps around you like another layer of fur. Another man adjusts the edge of the covering so it can be lifted for ventilation. The flap opens to a view of the water, black and smooth as obsidian. Cold air rushes in for a moment, biting your face before the flap drops again. The balance between air and warmth is delicate. The crew manages it with the ease of long habit. Every gesture seems learned through generations of trial and memory. One curious account from later Scandinavian seafarers mentions lining such tents with strips of bark to reflect body heat inward. No direct Viking evidence has been found for this, but the idea fits their inventiveness. You can easily imagine these men trying anything that offered a chance to outwit the cold. The animals move closer inside the tent, lying near the men's feet. The dogs sigh contentedly. The goat curls into a corner. Together they create a soft chorus of breathing and snuffling. You can feel the temperature rise further, the air becoming almost cozy. Someone jokes that if they stay under here too long, they might start sweating. The laughter that follows fills the tent, light and human. As the hours pass, the space becomes a refuge. Men nap, mend clothes, or carve small trinkets from bits of driftwood. You run your fingers along the inside of the hide, feeling the rough seams and the faint oil that keeps it waterproof. Drops of melted frost slide down and collect at the base of the tent. When one falls onto your wrist, it feels like proof that warmth still wins small battles here. Researchers studying Viking textiles note that their weaving techniques were sophisticated, far beyond what simple survival demanded. The hides and cloths could resist wind and repel water thanks to a diagonal weave and lanolin treatment. It is a reminder that ingenuity does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it looks like quiet stitching done in preparation for the worst. As evening comes, the light inside the tent turns golden and soft. The flap is opened slightly, revealing the glow of the horizon where the sun dips into the sea. The air smells faintly of smoke from the oil lamp someone dared to relight. The heat from so many bodies has turned the floorboards warm to the touch. You can almost forget where you are. One of the sailors looks around the enclosed space and nods with satisfaction. He tells you that every part of a ship must have two lives, one for battle and one for survival. When the oars are still and the swords are sheathed, the same deck becomes a shelter, a hearth without flame. His words linger. You start to understand that warmth, to the Vikings, was not a gift from the gods, but a skill to be earned. When night fully arrives, the tent becomes a cocoon. Outside, the world is sharp and merciless. Inside, you can hear steady breathing and the faint rustle of fur. You pull your cloak closer, your body heavy with fatigue. The air is humid, almost soft. The ship rocks gently, and for a moment, it feels like sleeping inside the chest of some vast, living creature. You drift towards sleep with one final thought. The Vikings may not have tamed the cold, but they learned to negotiate with it, to build small islands of warmth in an ocean of frost. The tent around you creaks softly in the wind, holding the promise that even here, surrounded by ice and silence, human hands can still make a home. When dawn returns, it finds the sea steaming lightly under a pale sky. The air is still bitter, but something stirs among the men that is not quite cold. You notice it in the way they smile, in the looseness of their shoulders, in the faint smell of smoke rising from the shore they left behind. They are remembering warmth, not just as a sensation but as a ritual. Before sailing, these warriors did something extraordinary. They baked their heat into their bones. Along the Norwegian coast, traces of ancient bathhouses have been discovered near Viking settlements. Some were dug into the earth, lined with stone, and fitted with channels to drain seawater. Inside, they placed heated rocks and poured water over them to create clouds of steam. These were the forerunners of the modern sauna, a tradition so enduring that even today it hums through northern culture. It was more than bathing, it was preparation. Men would gather before voyages to cleanse, sweat, and fill themselves with heat that would linger long after the steam faded. You imagine them on the morning of departure, standing in that dim, smoky space. The air glows red with heat, and sweat rolls down their bodies. They breathe deeply, eyes closed, as if drawing fire into their lungs. One man laughs, slapping his friend on the shoulder. Another pours a ladle of icy water over his head, and the hiss fills the room like applause. In that moment, they are alive in every sense, bodies burning before facing the cold sea. When they finally leave the steam house, the air outside feels like a blade, but they are ready. The sudden cold shocks their skin, yet instead of pain, it brings exhilaration. Blood surges, lungs open, and their bodies remember what it means to hold warmth from within. Some chroniclers, writing centuries later, described how Viking sailors would run directly from the sauna into snow or sea, claiming it hardened the spirit. Whether that is exaggeration or not, the idea feels true enough. Curiously, archaeological evidence suggests that these bathhouses were often placed near boathouses, almost as if one was a mirror of the other. Fire for one, water for the next. The proximity hints at a deliberate design, heat as ritual fuel for cold voyages. It seems the Vikings did not only rely on outer tools for warmth, they cultivated it inside themselves. A sailor on deck now seems to echo that tradition. He sits cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing steadily. His bare hands rest on his knees, palms upward. The others leave him undisturbed. You can almost feel the heat radiating from his calmness, like a memory of the sauna carried across the waves. His chest rises and falls in perfect rhythm. Breath by breath, he becomes an ember in human form. Modern physiologists might call this controlled breathing a primitive form of thermal regulation. Deep inhalations fill the lungs with air, while forceful exhalations drive blood to the surface, creating a faint flush of warmth. The Vikings may not have known the science, but they understood the effect. Breath, they believed, was a kind of fire gifted by the gods. To breathe deeply was to tend that inner flame. One old tale speaks of a warrior who, before a winter battle, fasted and sat alone in a steam hut for 3 days. When he finally emerged, his skin was red as molten iron, and he was said to walk through snow barefoot without flinching. Later storytellers may have exaggerated, but perhaps not entirely. The mind can make miracles when survival depends on it. The crew begins to prepare a meal. A pot is filled with snow and a handful of dried herbs. The snow melts slowly over a small oil lamp shielded from the wind. As the water warms, they drop bits of dried fish into it. Steam rises, carrying a scent that mingles with salt air. The smell reminds you faintly of pine and smoke, like an echo of those bathhouses on land. The men breathe it in deeply, as if remembering the heat that once surrounded them. When they eat, you notice how deliberate they are. Each spoonful is taken slowly, every swallow followed by a deep exhale. They seem to be feeding not just their bodies but the invisible furnace inside them. Heat, in their minds, is not wasted. It is cultivated. It must be grown, shared, and protected. One of the older sailors tells you that their ancestors believed heat could be stored in spirit as well as flesh. Before leaving home, they spent time near fires not only to dry clothes or prepare food, but to drink the fire's essence through breath and skin. The warmth they carried afterward was thought to be a kind of spiritual armor. He chuckles softly and adds, "Maybe the gods laughed at us, but it kept us alive." There is something poetic in the thought that warmth could travel inside you like faith. You close your eyes and imagine it. The faint heat in your stomach, the pulse in your fingertips, the rhythm of your breathing. The more you focus, the more alive it feels. You can see why such rituals persisted. They were less about superstition than about mastery of self. The afternoon passes slowly, the ship rocking on the quiet water. A calm has settled over everything. The air is cold enough to sting, yet within you burns a steady ember. You are not sure if it comes from the soup, from memory, or from the strange peace of this floating world. One last detail lingers in your mind. Some researchers think that Viking sailors carried heated stones from these bathhouses and stored them on the ship for the first few days at sea, using them to warm food or hands. If that is true, then the voyage you are on now may be continuing that very custom. Every bit of warmth aboard could be a direct inheritance from the hearths and saunas of their homeland. As twilight spreads, you look toward the west. The sun bleeds slowly into the horizon, casting copper light on the water. The men breathe in unison, still calm, still strong. You feel the rhythm joining yours, like the sea and sky and body have all learned the same lesson. Heat is not a thing you find, it is something you make. The light fades, but the warmth lingers. In the darkening air, you sense the memory of those long-ago saunas glowing quietly inside every man aboard. They carry their fire with them, invisible but unbreakable, the secret hearth of the Viking soul. The following morning arrives grey and damp, with the kind of cold that creeps in quietly rather than striking all at once. The sea stretches flat and silver under the muted light, and the men begin their day by stirring a pot that has been simmering since dawn. The smell is thick, earthy, and comforting. You peer inside and see chunks of salted meat and dried roots swirling in cloudy broth. Someone ladles a portion into a wooden bowl and hands it to you. The warmth in your hands feels like the most precious treasure in the world. Every voyage like this depended on food as both energy and heat. Viking sailors knew that fire might fail and shelter might tear, but a full stomach could keep the body burning from within. Surviving records of provisions from coastal settlements list smoked fish, salted pork, barley flour, dried berries, and mead made from honey. These were not luxuries but vital stores of life. The combination of fat, salt, and alcohol served a single purpose: to sustain warmth even when the world froze. The broth tastes simple but nourishing. It carries the sharp tang of salt and the sweetness of root vegetables softened by long boiling. The heat spreads from your tongue to your chest, melting the tension from your fingers. The men eat in silence at first, savoring the moment. Then one begins to talk about the last time his crew ran out of food on a journey to Iceland. They survived by eating their leather belts boiled in seawater. He laughs as he tells it, but the others nod solemnly. Survival, after all, leaves little room for pride. One of the crew members dips a piece of hard bread into his bowl and explains that this simple ritual of eating together is what keeps them alive. Each bowl of stew is not just nourishment, but a ceremony of unity. They measure their humanity in shared meals. The warmth of the food becomes the warmth of the group. Old Norse poetry often linked feasting to courage. In sagas, heroes gained strength not only from mead, but from the act of sitting with others at a common table. Warmth, food, and fellowship were inseparable. You sense the echo of that here, in the way the men talk between mouthfuls, in the laughter that rises from somewhere deep in their throats. Curiously, researchers analyzing residues from Viking cooking pots have discovered traces of animal fat mixed with herbs and wild onions. It suggests that even on long voyages, they valued flavor as well as survival. It seems warmth of the spirit mattered as much as warmth of the flesh. You imagine the cooks experimenting on the rolling deck, using whatever they had to remind the crew of home. Someone produces a skin flask of mead, its golden liquid catching the pale light. He passes it around, and each man takes a sip. The drink burns slightly as it slides down your throat, spreading an immediate wave of heat through your chest. The sweetness is almost floral, a ghost of summer hidden inside this frozen world. It is easy to see why mead held such an honored place in Norse culture. It was sunlight stored in liquid form. An older sailor, eyes bright from the drink, begins telling a story about the mead of poetry, a mythical brew said to give wisdom and inspiration to those who drank it. The others laugh, teasing him about claiming divine gifts from his own flask. Still, there is reverence in their laughter. The myth reminds them that even the gods needed warmth and sweetness to survive the harshness of creation. There is an old line from the Havamal, a collection of Viking wisdom sayings: "Fire is needed by him who has come in from the cold." It continues to describe how bread and clothing must follow, because without these, even a hero cannot last. The men might not quote it aloud, but they live by it. The act of eating hot stew and passing mead is not just routine, it is philosophy in motion. Some archaeologists argue that Viking crews planned their meals with remarkable precision. They rationed ingredients to balance fat and salt, understanding intuitively what modern nutritionists call caloric density. Others think it was more improvisation than science, that instinct guided their hands. Either way, their diets worked. Their endurance in sub-zero conditions remains one of the most impressive feats of maritime history. As you finish your bowl, the warmth lingers in your core. The deck feels less hostile. Even the pale sky seems less oppressive. You watch the men clean their utensils by dipping them briefly into the sea, then rubbing them dry on their cloaks. No one complains about the cold water. It is simply another tool. Everything here is used, nothing wasted. After the meal, the crew gathers to share a second round of mead. One man lifts his cup and makes a small toast to warmth that lives in the belly when the world turns to ice. The others echo his words softly. The sound drifts into the air like a prayer. You realize that every act of survival has become sacred in its own way. As the ship continues forward, the rhythm of oars resumes. The warmth from the food and drink keeps you alert but calm. The repetition of rowing feels almost meditative, as if every pull draws heat from the body's core and releases it into the cold world around you. Each stroke becomes an offering to balance life against frost. By late afternoon, the air cools again, but the memory of the meal remains strong. You catch yourself smiling for no reason. The taste of salt and honey lingers on your tongue. You feel alive, anchored by something deeper than comfort. As the sun lowers, the sailors begin preparing their next small ration, humming softly while they work. The scent of broth rises again, mingling with the endless sound of the sea. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the ship's slow sway. The warmth within you has become a quiet heartbeat. For a people who faced the cold as an everyday companion, food was not merely sustenance, it was defiance. With every bowl, every shared sip, they reminded the sea that fire could live in the human stomach, that warmth could travel wherever courage went. The next day dawns bright and painfully clear, the kind of light that makes the ice glitter like knives. Frost outlines every rope, every plank, even the beards of the men. Yet the crew looks content. The night had been calm, and their stomachs still remember the warmth of broth and mead. They stretch, groan, and take up the oars again. The sound of the wood slicing through water is steady and hypnotic. Each stroke is a slow exhalation, each return a heartbeat. The rhythm carries you into a trance. You begin to notice small details that had gone unseen before. The way the sunlight reflects off the oars, the glimmer of ice breaking in the wake, the faint mist of breath rising in front of every face. It is a frozen world, yet alive in motion. In the distance, faint hills shimmer beneath a veil of frost. The world feels silent except for the pulse of the ship. Old navigational tools were simple, yet effective. According to surviving accounts, Viking sailors used the sun's position, the flight of birds, and the color of water to find their way. Some even carried sunstones, crystals of calcite that could reveal the sun's direction through clouds. Holding one up now, you can imagine it splitting the light into bright and dim rays, guiding a path through fog. It is a reminder that even navigation, for these men, depended on the interplay of light and warmth. One of the sailors calls out to his companions, pointing to a column of vapor curling off the sea. It looks like smoke, but it is just the cold air colliding with warmer water. The sight is eerie and beautiful, as if the ocean is exhaling. The men take it as a sign that the gods are breathing with them. Whether that is poetry or belief, it feels true in this vast stillness. A curious record from Icelandic texts mentions sailors describing the sea as boiling when the weather shifted suddenly. Modern science explains it as sea smoke, created when freezing air meets slightly warmer currents. Yet for those men, it was something alive, something that spoke. You can see why they turned to myth so often. It was the only language large enough for such beauty and danger. The frost clings to your eyelashes, making the world shimmer at its edges. You can taste salt and ice in every breath. When you exhale, the vapor feels heavier than air, as if it wants to fall back to the deck. The sound of breathing becomes communal, a slow harmony rising and falling like waves. The cold has a voice, and the crew listens. One of the older men begins to sing, his voice low and rough, shaped by years of wind. The words are in Old Norse, but their meaning feels simple. Movement is life, stillness is death. The song grows as others join, filling the air with rhythm and defiance. Their chanting keeps time with the oars. It is not joyous, not mournful either. It is the sound of endurance, steady as the heartbeat of the world. Some historians believe these rowing songs were functional as much as spiritual. They kept the crew synchronized and prevented exhaustion from taking hold. The beat of the song matched the pace of the body, and the breath warmed the lungs. It was both discipline and medicine. You notice frost forming again on the oar handles. The men pause briefly to rub them with wool and tar, the same mixture used before. Their fingers are red and cracked, yet they move with quiet precision. Each small motion keeps them alive. The ship glides forward, glistening in the sun like a creature made of ice and muscle. At midday, the wind rises. The temperature drops so sharply that every exhale crystallizes instantly. Frost builds along the edges of the sail, turning it white. The helmsman grins grimly and adjusts his course. You can feel the ship strain against the gust, its timbers groaning like an old beast refusing to yield. The spray hits your face, sharp as glass. According to one explorer's account written centuries later, Viking crews considered frost not as an enemy but as a test of worth. They believed that each layer of ice on the ship was a mark of endurance, proof that they could travel where others could not. The frost on their beards became a badge of pride. Looking around now, you see that pride reflected in every glinting face. The man beside you laughs suddenly, his beard shining white. He gestures toward his frozen hair and says something that sounds like a boast. You laugh with him, though your lips sting from the cold. The laughter itself feels warming, a spark that no frost can smother. In that moment, you begin to understand something profound. The cold is not just an obstacle, it is part of the rhythm. It sharpens senses, focuses thought, forces cooperation. Every breath is earned, every movement deliberate. The men do not fight the cold anymore, they dance with it. The sun begins to sink behind the horizon, staining the sky orange and violet. The light makes the frost glow as if the ship is wrapped in crystal. The wind softens, and silence settles again. You feel both exhausted and exhilarated, as if you have witnessed something sacred. Modern climatologists studying the North Atlantic suggest that the air temperature in Viking routes often dropped below freezing even in summer. Yet the records show voyages continuing relentlessly. The explanation is simple: adaptation. These sailors were not superhuman. They were simply willing to learn from the world rather than curse it. As the last light fades, you can see each man's breath glowing faintly in the dark, forming halos that vanish as quickly as they appear. The ship drifts forward on a sea of glass, its reflection merging with the stars beginning to bloom overhead. You pull your cloak tighter and feel your heartbeat slowing, steady and warm. For the first time, you no longer feel separate from the ship or the sea. Everything is rhythm and breath. The frost that once felt like an enemy now feels like part of the story, a reminder that life shines brightest where the world is coldest. The oars dip again, slow and sure, carrying you forward into the night. Night falls thick and absolute. The stars spill across the sky in clusters so bright that they seem close enough to touch. The sea below reflects them perfectly, making it difficult to tell where the heavens end and the water begins. The cold sharpens until even your breath sounds brittle. You pull your cloak tighter, but the air still seeps through every layer. Around you, the crew huddles together, faces half hidden, eyes glinting in the starlight. Then, quietly, something happens. One of the men lifts his shield and places it flat on the deck. Another crouches and slides something beneath it. You catch a faint glow, red and secretive, leaking through the cracks. The men glance around, ensuring no wind can reach it. Then they sit near it, hands outstretched. You realize what you are seeing: hidden fire. There are stories told in hushed voices of Vikings who defied their own rule and smuggled embers aboard. Some sagas call them reckless, others call them ingenious. The idea seems impossible, Yet fragments of blackened wood found beneath preserved shield bosses in a few wrecks hint that it might have happened. Whether these were cooking coals or offerings to the gods, no one knows. But it is easy to believe, watching these men guard the small forbidden light. The warmth from the hidden coals is faint but unmistakable. You can feel it tickling your palms like a living breath. The smell of charred wood reaches your nose, sweet and dangerous. The men speak softly, their words slow and reverent. This fire is not meant for cooking or light. It is a symbol, a reminder of the hearths they left behind. One of them says that the flame is a piece of home, stolen from the past to survive the present. Another replies that if the gods see it, they will smile. The youngest sailor touches his fingers to his lips and then to the shield, a quiet act of devotion. The scene feels both ordinary and sacred. There are competing theories about this practice. Some historians think it was metaphorical, a poetic invention meant to describe courage rather than literal fire. Others believe it was real, an act of rebellion against fear. The uncertainty adds to its power. Whether factual or imagined, the idea of smuggling warmth into the heart of danger captures everything about the Viking spirit. The flame beneath the shield burns low. The men feed it carefully with bits of dried moss soaked in oil. The smoke curls in thin threads, vanishing before it can set off alarm. Every gesture is cautious, deliberate, practiced. This is not the recklessness of fools. It is the discipline of people who know the price of mistakes. You find yourself thinking of how every culture finds ways to carry its hearth with it. For the Vikings, whose lives unfolded between frozen seas and wind-scoured coasts, warmth became a religion. The hearth was not just a place to eat or sleep, it was a living boundary between life and death. By hiding fire under a shield, they brought that boundary with them, even where it was forbidden. The glow flickers and reflects off the polished metal rim of the shield, turning it into a small sundae. The men lean closer, faces softened by the red light. You can see how easily this could become myth. In the darkness, it looks as if the ship itself holds a heartbeat. A curious bit of folklore says that sailors who carried secret fire were protected from frost spirits, creatures said to drift across the water, stealing heat from men's souls. Perhaps this story began as a way to justify the risk. Perhaps it was simply truth told in the language of imagination. Either way, the fire stays alive, and so do its keepers. The helmsman walks by once, sees what they are doing, and pauses. His expression is unreadable. He should be angry, perhaps, but instead he gives a slow nod and walks on. That single gesture tells you everything. Every man aboard knows the rule, yet they also know the need. Survival has its own laws. You crouch closer, feeling the warmth wash over your numb hands. It is astonishing how quickly comfort spreads. The light paints the inside of your eyelids when you blink, glowing even in memory. The men begin whispering stories now, the kind meant to be told only in firelight. Tales of sea monsters, of gods disguised as fishermen, of frost giants who can smell fear. The tone is playful, but underneath it lies respect for the unseen. As they speak, you realize that the flame has drawn more than heat. It has drawn humanity back to the deck. The ship feels alive again, humming softly in time with their voices. Even the animals seem calmer, the dogs curled at the men's feet, the goat chewing idly near the mast. After a while, one of the older men takes a small iron spoon and stirs the ashes. He murmurs something about not letting the fire sleep too long, or it might dream of burning the ship. The others chuckle, but their laughter fades into quiet reflection. In the world of the Vikings, where danger was constant, control was sacred. Fire could never be trusted fully, yet it could not be forsaken either. They learned to hold it close, but never tight, to balance on the edge between need and disaster. Eventually, the coals dim. The men cover them completely with a layer of sand, then replace the shield on top. The deck returns to darkness. The air cools instantly, but a strange peace remains. You can still smell the ghost of smoke, faint and comforting. It feels as though the fire has hidden itself inside your chest now, glowing just enough to keep the cold from claiming you. The night deepens, and silence returns. The stars wheel overhead, their light sharp and infinite. You lie back, staring upward, and wonder how many generations repeated this same ritual, risking everything to keep a single spark alive. The sea sighs beneath the hull. The world is cold again, but you are not afraid. Somewhere under your ribs, a tiny ember still burns. By the time dawn touches the horizon again, the sea has frozen into small plates of ice that crackle against the ship's hull. The sound is delicate at first, like glass being tapped with a spoon, but soon it grows into a steady chorus. The crew moves carefully, testing each step as if afraid their weight might shatter the surface beneath them. The longship glides forward slowly, its bow parting the floating fragments with soft clicks and groans. You crouch to examine the way the hull cuts through the ice. Each plank of wood fits snugly against the next, forming a pattern of overlapping boards called clinker construction. This design, perfected by Norse shipbuilders, gives the vessel both strength and flexibility. The air trapped between layers of wood acts as insulation, keeping the cold of the sea from seeping upward too quickly. It is an elegant solution, simple and brilliant, born of centuries of trial and error. Archaeological studies of preserved longships from Roskilde and Oseberg show that this method was deliberate. The overlapping seams reduced drag in water and helped resist freezing damage. Some scholars even argue that the pattern itself created small pockets of trapped air, like the down of a bird's feathers, adding a thin layer of protection against the chill. Whether by science or luck, the design worked. You run your hand along the planks and feel their texture, rough in places, smooth in others, coated with layers of tar and oil. The smell of pine sap rises faintly. It feels alive, as though the ship itself is breathing under your touch. The men talk about the vessel like a living companion, not a tool. One of them pats the side and says that she keeps the frost out better than any fur. Curiously, the Vikings believed that ships had souls. Some were even buried with offerings as if they were warriors laid to rest. It makes sense when you consider how the wood bends and creaks under strain, how it groans like a sleeping creature when the waves press against it. You can almost feel its pulse through your boots. The warmth of motion spreads from the planks upward, faint but steady. The helmsman explains that the shape of the hull is as important as its material. The deep curve traps air beneath it, and as the waves roll, that air is squeezed and released like breath. The process might be invisible, but the sailors trust it completely. To them, the ship is both body and spirit, muscle and memory. It carries warmth not only in structure, but in faith. One curious feature catches your eye. Thin strips of animal hide are stuffed between the seams of the planks. When you touch them, they feel waxy and firm. These strips expand slightly when wet, sealing the gaps tighter. The hides come from seals or oxen, treated with oil and ash. The combination keeps the cold water out and the trapped air in. You can almost see the minds that devised this trick, shaping survival from materials at hand. As the morning wears on, frost begins to creep along the inner walls of the ship, tracing white veins across the wood. The men scrape it away gently with their knives. You ask why, and one sailor grins. He tells you that too much frost can rob the warmth from the wood itself. If left unchecked, the planks grow brittle, and the ship begins to lose its spirit. He says it half jokingly, half serious. The Vikings never separated craftsmanship from belief. Every piece of their world carried meaning. Even the structure of their ships reflected the same balance they sought in life: flexibility and strength, faith and practicality. Some modern shipwrights who have rebuilt Viking longships describe a peculiar phenomenon. When the vessels sail at full speed, the hull seems to hum softly, as if vibrating with energy. They say it feels almost warm beneath the feet despite the icy spray. Perhaps it is friction, perhaps resonance, or perhaps something more mysterious. Whatever the cause, the sound comforts the sailors, like a lullaby sung by the wood itself. A sudden crack jolts you from your thoughts. A sheet of ice has wedged against the bow, stopping the ship momentarily. The men leap into motion, wielding axes to break it apart. The sharp thuds echo across the water. Shards of ice fly into the air, catching sunlight like sparks. For a few moments, it feels as if fire has taken a new form. The rhythm of chopping fills the cold air, quick and precise. Soon the path is clear again, and the ship surges forward. The helmsman wipes his brow and laughs, steam rising from his mouth. He remarks that the ship's skin is tougher than theirs, that it knows how to fight cold without complaint. You look at the vessel anew, realizing that its design, more than anything else, makes this journey possible. Without it, no wool, oil, or fire would matter. Even in silence, you can sense the way the ship shelters its crew. The overlapping planks creak softly, absorbing the strain of the waves. The tar and seal fat glisten in the dim light. Every sound feels reassuring, every vibration a heartbeat. You can feel the warmth of motion returning, small but vital, spreading through your legs into your chest. As the sun lowers, the ice around the ship begins to fade into mist. The men relax, shoulders dropping, voices rising again in quiet talk. One hums a tune, tapping his fingers on the plank beside him. The ship answers with a hollow echo, as if keeping rhythm. For a moment, you wonder whether the vessel itself might remember the countless voyages it has survived. When night finally falls, the air grows quiet again. The hull's hum deepens with the rolling tide, steady and low. The deck glows faintly from reflected starlight, and you can almost believe that the ship is still warm from within, holding the memory of fireless heat like a creature made for endurance. You close your eyes, your hand resting on the smooth plank beside you. Beneath that wood lies the secret of Viking warmth, a structure that breathes, flexes, and protects. The ship is not just a means of travel, it is a floating home, a shield against the sea's cold heart. When morning breaks again, the frost on the oars glitters like silver. The men gather them carefully, wrapping the handles in strips of wool soaked with tar. The air smells of pine, oil, and cold iron. The work is quiet, deliberate, and practiced. You can tell they have done this countless times before. Their movements flow with the rhythm of habit, a kind of ritual born of necessity. Each oar is both weapon and lifeline. Without it, the ship cannot move, and without movement, warmth fades quickly. The wool wrappings are thick and dark, their fibers sticky with grease. As the men wind them tightly around the wood, you can hear the soft hiss of air forced out between the fibers. Once secured, the handles look like extensions of the men's own arms, solid and living. According to experimental reconstructions of Viking tools, tarred wool was an excellent insulator. It prevented ice from forming on the surface and provided grip even when wet. The sticky texture also kept hands from blistering during long voyages. It was not elegant, but it was effective. Some scholars have even suggested that the tar itself, heated slightly before use, released a faint warmth that lingered for hours. You can almost feel that warmth in your own hands as you grip the oar. A young sailor explains that each oar has a name. He calls his frost biter. Another laughs and says his is old bone. Naming tools is not superstition but affection. The Vikings believed that anything which carried your strength deserved respect. The man runs his thumb along the edge of the wool wrap and murmurs something like a greeting before dipping his blade into the sea to test its motion. The water hisses around it, dark and glassy. You watch them row, the oars dipping in and out in perfect time. The ship seems to breathe with them. Every push brings heat back into their bodies. The effort itself becomes a source of fire. Their cheeks flush, their breaths grow heavier, but the rhythm never falters. The sound of oars striking water becomes a heartbeat for the frozen world. One sailor jokes that rowing is the best furnace a man can own. He says that no god ever gifted warmth as reliable as muscle. His companions nod, smiling through cracked lips. It is true. The act of rowing is more than labor. It is survival through motion. A curious detail emerges when you look closer. The men periodically pause and rub their hands with a paste made from animal fat mixed with soot. It darkens their skin but keeps the wind from biting too deeply. They claim it seals the body's heat, a practice passed down from ancestors who rode in colder seas. Modern researchers might call it an early form of protective balm, though it looks more like war paint. The combination of grease and movement keeps frostbite at bay. The wind picks up, sharp and dry. It whistles through the gaps in the sail, tugging at the edges of cloaks. The oars creak as they meet resistance, but the men lean harder, finding rhythm in opposition. Each stroke warms the chest, shoulders, and back. You can almost see steam rising from their bodies. Sweat freezes quickly, forming crystals on their brows, yet they do not slow. The struggle itself has become part of their warmth. Somewhere near the middle of the ship, one of the older men adjusts the wrapping on his oar. He hums softly as he works, his voice low and steady. The tune is familiar, one of the same rowing chants you heard before. It serves both to pass time and to keep the group in sync. He explains that the best rhythm is the one that keeps blood hot and oar true. You nod, though your breath fogs too quickly for words. Historical evidence from Viking burial sites shows that oars were sometimes placed alongside warriors in their graves. Archaeologists once puzzled over this, but the reasoning now seems clear. To a sailor, an oar was not simply a tool of movement, it was a companion in endurance, a partner in the battle against the sea. The warmth of rowing, the unity of muscle and rhythm, was worth honoring even in death. You notice that the tips of the oars are bound with thin metal bands. They glint faintly when catching sunlight. The bands protect the wood from splitting against ice or rocks. When you touch one, it feels slightly warmer than the frozen air, as if holding the ghost of friction. Every small innovation adds a layer of comfort, another barrier between life and the endless cold. The crew's faces glow faintly with effort, their eyes narrow against the glare of sunlight on the water. Sweat trickles down their temples, freezing into tiny beads that sparkle like jewels. Despite the exhaustion, they seem content. The oars create rhythm, and rhythm creates heat. The ship moves faster now, slicing through small patches of ice with the grace of something alive. One sailor begins to laugh mid-stroke, shouting something about how the cold will have to chase harder if it wants them. The others answer with shouts of their own, half joy, half defiance. The laughter builds until it feels like another kind of flame, invisible but strong. As the day stretches on, you begin to understand that warmth is not always gentle. Sometimes it is forged in struggle, in the repetition of movement, in shared exhaustion. Each oar's motion becomes a declaration that they will not stop, no matter how fierce the sea becomes. When the sun finally begins to fade, the men slow their pace. The muscles in their arms tremble, their fingers stiff, yet their faces carry quiet satisfaction. The wrappings on the oars are slick with frost and tar, shining like obsidian. The air smells of effort and endurance. The ship drifts on momentum alone, gliding smoothly across the water that now looks like molten silver in the dying light. You set your oar down, feeling the warmth pulsing through the wood into your palms. It is the heat of friction, of life refusing to yield. The sea stretches endlessly around you, vast and indifferent, but here on this moving piece of wood and willpower, you carry a small, undeniable fire. As night gathers, the men sit back, breathing heavily, steam rising from their cloaks. They look around and nod to one another, wordless and proud. Their warmth has been earned stroke by stroke. In that shared silence, you feel what they must feel, the simple, defiant truth that movement is survival, and the heart that beats in rhythm with an oar will never truly freeze. The evening air has softened, but only slightly. The ship glides forward with a rhythm that feels almost human, its movement matched by the steady breathing of the men. The day's rowing has left their arms heavy and their backs sore, yet their spirits remain calm. Then, slowly, a sound begins to rise. It starts as a single hum, low and steady, from one of the older sailors sitting near the mast. Within moments, another voice joins, then another, until the air vibrates with harmony. It is not a song meant for performance. It is work made musical, labor turned into comfort. The melody loops in simple patterns, words falling away until only rhythm remains. The oars dip to its tempo, each movement flowing like breath. The sound feels ancient, carved from the same wind that once carried their ancestors across these waters. Some fragments of medieval writing describe how Norse sailors used rowing chants called fornothislag, rhythmic verses built for strength and focus. The structure of those chants' short lines, repeating beats, fit perfectly with the pull and release of an oar. Modern historians believe these songs were both practical and spiritual, guiding the body while binding the crew's energy into one living current. Listening now, you feel that current pull you in. One man changes the rhythm, his tone rising slightly. The others answer, creating a wave of call and response. The sound fills the space between the cold and the sea, as if the air itself has caught fire. Each voice becomes a spark, and together they form something larger than warmth. The chant becomes their heartbeat. A curious detail recorded by later travelers mentions that these chants were sometimes improvised. Sailors created verses about the wind, the ice, even their ship. The lyrics could shift from humor to reverence in a single breath. One man sings about frost clinging to his beard like a crown. Another laughs and adds a verse about the sea wanting to keep him as a husband. The humor lightens the chill, reminding everyone that laughter itself is another form of heat. The helmsman joins in with a deep tone that anchors the melody. His voice rumbles through the wood beneath your feet, resonating like thunder trapped in the hull. You realize that this vibration, the sound of men breathing and moving together, is a kind of furnace. It warms not the skin but the heart. In this shared music, hierarchy disappears. The youngest sailor sings beside the oldest, the weakest beside the strongest. Each voice matters equally, each breath a contribution to survival. The unity feels effortless, born from instinct rather than command. You begin to understand why these voyages, however brutal, were remembered with pride. To sing in the face of cold is to tell the world you are still alive. Some researchers of Nordic culture suggest that rhythm and song were essential psychological tools for enduring hardship. They kept minds occupied, reduced fear, and gave purpose to pain. In a way, each chant was a ritual of defiance. When the sea roared, they sang louder. When the wind froze their hands, they answered with melody. The world could take warmth, but not their voice. A particularly strange tradition survives in a few sagas, that sailors believed certain tones could calm storms. It might sound superstitious, but the connection between vibration and calm is real enough. Even now you feel how the song steadies the ship. The motion becomes smoother, the oars gliding without strain. The sound organizes chaos into order. As the chant continues, you feel your own body react. Your shoulders loosen, your breath deepens. You find yourself joining quietly, letting your voice blend into the sea of sound. The melody requires no words, only trust in its rhythm. Around you, the crew's faces soften. Eyes half closed, they sing as if remembering something sacred. When the song finally fades, silence rushes back like a tide. The air feels strangely warm despite the cold. The men exchange nods, a few small smiles. The connection lingers long after the sound is gone. It reminds you of the warmth after laughter, the peace after prayer. Music, like fire, leaves its ember behind. The helmsman mutters that the sea listens when men sing honestly. No one questions him. The belief is not about magic but about balance. Sound fills the emptiness, gives the cold something to echo back. You feel that truth deep in your bones. Night arrives quietly. The stars are clear, and the air still trembles faintly from the vibrations that once filled it. The men settle to rest, their breath rising in soft clouds. You close your eyes and hear the ghost of the song replaying in memory. Its rhythm continues inside your chest, steady and reassuring. Perhaps this was how they survived most nights, through shared sound, shared movement, and shared breath. It was not warmth in the ordinary sense, but warmth in its purest form, human connection defying the silence of an indifferent sea. You lie back, feeling the ship's slow sway beneath you. The stars glitter like sparks above, the sea hums quietly below, and between them, you drift, warmed by echoes of voices that refuse to be quiet. The next day begins with the pale glow of dawn, soft as milk on the water. The air feels strangely calm, as if the sea itself is waiting for something. The men move about the deck quietly, speaking in low voices. You notice them tracing patterns with their fingers on the wooden railing and on their shields. The movements are deliberate and rhythmic. When you look closer, you see they are carving small marks, shallow but purposeful, runes. Old Norse runes were more than letters. They were pieces of belief, symbols that bound thought and fate. A Viking might carve one to bless a voyage, another to guard against storms, and another to call for courage when fear pressed close. These inscriptions were not mere decoration. They were prayers written in wood and iron, a language that could speak to things beyond sight. One sailor finishes his carving and wipes the dust away. The mark glints faintly where the blade has cut through frost. It looks like a simple line crossed with another, but he tells you it means warmth, the breath of life. He says it keeps the spirit from freezing, even when the sea tries to steal it. You watch him touch the rune lightly, lips moving in a silent promise. Archaeologists have found traces of similar carvings on fragments of ships and weapons, their meanings often linked to endurance or safe passage. Some historians think these were simply marks of ownership or memory, but others believe they carried power for those who made them. It is easy to believe the latter as you watch these men work, their faith blending with skill. The air smells faintly of pine sap and smoke from the small lamp the crew has managed to keep lit. Each rune seems to catch that light, holding it in its grooves. The men talk about old charms, the kind once whispered by healers and scalds. One mentions the Izaz rune, the ice symbol, which they sometimes carve not to invite cold but to control it. To understand ice, they said, was to master it. A curious tradition mentioned in later sagas speaks of warriors warming their hands by tracing runes across their palms before battle. It was believed that the act awakened energy, stirring courage and blood. Whether that truly generated heat or not, you cannot tell, but the idea itself feels powerful. These markings turn fear into motion. The youngest sailor asks an older man to carve one for him, claiming his hands are too cold to hold the knife. The elder nods and begins working. The blade scratches softly across the wood, a sound almost like whispering. When he finishes, he blows on the carving, sealing it with breath. Then he presses the handle into the young man's palm. "Now," he says, "you carry the warmth of two souls." The boy grins and grips it tightly. In the Viking world, warmth was as much spirit as flame. They believed that a person's will could shape reality, that intent could spark invisible fire. Their runes were vessels for that intent. Every carved mark on this ship feels like a heartbeat recorded in wood. You touch one near your seat and feel a strange calm spread through your fingers. Some scholars today remain uncertain about whether Vikings actually used runes for magical protection at sea. The evidence is scarce, yet the repetition of stories, across regions and centuries, suggests deep roots. Maybe it does not matter whether it worked. What mattered was that they believed it did, and belief itself can heat the soul. The wind picks up slightly, fluttering the edges of cloaks. The runes glisten with a thin sheen of ice, catching the light like small fires. The men pause to admire their work, a rare moment of quiet pride. The ship feels less like a vessel now and more like a living charm, its surfaces covered in the language of endurance. Then one of the sailors pulls a small pouch from his tunic. Inside are bits of red ochre mixed with ash. He dips a finger in and rubs the mixture over a carved rune, colouring it deep crimson. The pigment sinks into the wood, giving the mark the look of fresh blood. He says this awakens the symbol, feeding it with life. Others follow his example, staining their carvings with color. Soon the deck glows faintly with dozens of tiny marks, red against pale frost, as if the ship itself has veins. You can feel something shift in the air. The men seem lighter, their steps firmer. The act of carving has done more than decorate their world. It has steadied them. Ritual, in its quiet way, replaces fear with focus. You realize that in an age before insulation or technology, belief was their greatest defense. Even the animals seem to sense the change. The dogs rise and stretch, tails wagging. The goat shakes its head, bells jingling softly. The warmth that spreads through the ship is not physical, yet it is real. The air feels thicker, almost charged. As evening approaches, the sun slides low, painting the water in gold and silver. The runes catch the last light and shimmer. The men sit together, rubbing their hands near the tiny lamp flame, the glow dancing across their carved symbols. They talk about home, about families waiting beyond the fjords, about fires that burn in halls far from this frozen sea. You look down at your own hands, rough from cold, and imagine carving something for yourself, maybe a mark for memory or for courage. You trace the motion with your fingertip against the deck, and though nothing appears, the gesture itself feels like an act of warmth. When night comes, the crew settles beneath their cloaks. The ship creaks gently, every rune around you whispering its silent promise. You breathe in the cold air and exhale warmth into the dark. Somewhere between the sound of waves and wood, you can almost hear the language of survival written into the bones of the ship. The morning light stretches thin across the horizon, revealing a faint strip of land in the distance. The air is sharper today, carrying the scent of snow and pine. The men watch silently, their breath forming clouds that fade as quickly as they appear. They are nearing the northern edge of their route, a place where few outsiders ever dared to travel. Here, the Vikings met others who had mastered the cold long before them. According to surviving chronicles, the Norse traded with Arctic peoples like the Sami and Finnic tribes. From them, they learned new ways to face the bitter climate. It was an exchange not just of goods, but of wisdom. The Sami lived in worlds of snow and wind, their knowledge carved into centuries of endurance. They taught the Norse how to read the ice, how to move with the weather instead of against it, and how to borrow warmth from the land itself. As the ship approaches a small inlet, a thin column of smoke curls from the shoreline. The crew recognizes it immediately. It is a signal, an invitation. They steer closer, and soon you see figures standing among reindeer hides, stretched on wooden frames. Their clothing is unlike anything you've seen before, layers of fur and skin sewn with sinew, every surface designed to trap air and deflect moisture. Even their boots, lined with moss, seem perfectly adapted to the cold. The Sami greet the sailors with nods and measured smiles. They do not waste words. In this climate, speech itself must be efficient. A small fire burns in a pit shielded by stones. The smoke rises gently, carrying the scent of fat and resin. The crew disembarks carefully, stamping the stiffness from their legs. The warmth from the fire feels shocking, almost unreal after so many days without it. The Sami leader offers a strip of reindeer meat cooked in its own grease. It is rich, heavy, and comforting. The Vikings trade dried fish, iron tools, and cloth. The exchange happens mostly through gestures and short phrases, a ritual of trust built on survival. In this frozen place, warmth becomes a universal language. One of the older sailors points at a coat hanging near the fire. It is made from reindeer fur turned inward, soft and thick. The Sami woman tending it lifts it up and presses it against your arm. The warmth seeps in immediately. She explains, through gestures and a few shared words, that the fur's hollow hairs trap heat even when soaked. It is nature's perfect insulation. You can see admiration in the sailors' eyes. They understand craftsmanship when they see it. A curious practice unfolds as the Sami prepare to demonstrate something. They heat flat stones in the fire, then wrap them in birch bark and animal skin. The bundles are placed beneath reindeer hides on the ground, forming a heated bed. One man invites you to sit, and when you do, the warmth seeps upward, spreading through your legs. The Vikings exchange amazed looks. They recognize in this simple invention a solution to one of their greatest challenges: sleeping warm on icy nights. Archaeological discoveries in northern Scandinavia have confirmed such heating methods. Flat stones and fragments of bark, scorched but intact, tell stories of ingenious comfort. It is likely that visiting Norsemen borrowed the idea, adapting it for use on ships with clay or sand instead of bark. Innovation, after all, thrives where life is hardest. The Sami share another secret. They demonstrate how to rub reindeer fat into the seams of boots and gloves, then dust it with powdered bark to seal it. The result feels smooth, almost waxy. One of the sailors grins and imitates the process, coating his own gloves. The smell is strong, but within minutes his hands look revived. He laughs, flexing his fingers, and the Sami laugh with him. Warmth has turned strangers into companions. As the sky darkens, the Vikings are invited to sit around the fire. The Sami begin to chant softly, their voices blending with the hiss of burning resin. The melody is unlike anything you have heard before, flowing and circular, with no clear beginning or end. The rhythm feels alive, as if mimicking the movement of wind and snow. The Vikings listen, captivated. Some hum along quietly, following the rise and fall of sound. Later, one of the sailors whispers that the song is meant to keep the spirits of frost at bay. He calls them frost folk, invisible beings who wander the tundra stealing breath from sleepers. Whether he truly believes it or simply admires the poetry, his eyes shine with wonder. In this frozen place, myths and practical knowledge intertwine seamlessly. When it is time to leave, the Sami gift the crew small pouches of dried lichen and moss. They explain that when soaked in oil, these can be packed into boots for warmth. The sailors bow their thanks, promising trade on the return voyage. As the ship drifts away from the shore, the glow of the fire fades into the distance, but the knowledge remains. Some modern anthropologists credit the Sami with shaping much of northern survival culture. The Vikings, despite their reputation for conquest, were quick to learn from others. Adaptation, not arrogance, kept them alive. You can sense that spirit now as the men examine their new gear, already planning how to use it. As night falls, the crew sets up the hides over the deck again. Beneath them, the air is warmer than usual. The reindeer fur they traded glows faintly in the lamplight, thick and soft. You lie against it and feel heat flow from the fibers into your skin. It is a gift of another people, another world, yet it feels perfectly natural here. You look around and see the men settling into sleep, their faces relaxed, the dogs curled beside them. Outside, the sea murmurs softly against the hull. Above, the stars shine brighter than ever, reflected in the black water. You realize that every source of warmth the Vikings found: fire, wool, breath, and now the wisdom of others has become part of one endless chain. The wind stirs, carrying a faint echo of the Sami chant across the water. The sound fades quickly, but its rhythm remains in your mind. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the warmth beneath you and the chill above you. Between the two, you drift into calm sleep, wrapped in the shared knowledge of survival. The wind rises before dawn, carrying with it a chill that cuts through every layer of fabric and fur. The men wake to the sound of the hull groaning under pressure. When you look over the edge of the ship, you see sheets of ice pressing against the sides, sliding and grinding like the jaws of some enormous creature. The sea is closing in. Each man knows what must be done. They move quickly, pulling axes and hammers from beneath the benches. The air fills with the sound of metal striking ice. Every blow rings sharp and hollow, echoing across the frozen expanse. It is a violent rhythm, a desperate music of survival. The ice splinters into shards that glitter in the early light before vanishing under the black water. According to fragments of Icelandic chronicles, Viking crews often faced frozen seas on their northern routes. They carried short-handled axes and iron-tipped poles to break free when trapped. Modern expeditions have confirmed that their longships, with their flexible clinker-built hulls, could survive such punishment. The wood bent instead of cracking, shifting with each impact like a living thing. You watch one of the younger men swing his axe again and again until sweat shines on his forehead. Frost collects in his beard, making him look older than he is. The cold tries to steal his strength, but the motion keeps him alive. Every strike sends warmth rushing through his arms. The others join him, their voices rising in grunts and shouts of effort. Together they turn exhaustion into heat. One sailor calls out that the ice sings when it is ready to break. You listen closely and hear it. A faint, high-pitched note that wavers and then snaps. The sound is eerie but beautiful. The men cheer when the largest block splits and drifts aside. For a few moments, sunlight floods through the gap, and the sea glimmers like polished steel. A curious belief found in old maritime tales says that the sea has moods, just like a person. When calm, it rewards the respectful, but when angered, it punishes arrogance. Perhaps that is why the men shout thanks when the ice breaks. Their gratitude is rough but sincere. In this world, survival depends on humility as much as strength. The helmsman orders the crew to keep moving. The oars strike the water again, pushing the ship slowly forward. The friction of effort drives away the chill for now, but you can still feel the cold lurking beneath your skin. Around you, steam rises faintly from the men's backs. The ship smells of tar, sweat, and the faint sweetness of resin. Historians studying accounts of Arctic navigation believe that the Vikings saw every frozen obstacle as a challenge from the gods. Some even claimed that the spirit of Thor guided their axes, cracking the ice with unseen strength. Others argued that such stories were morale, not faith words meant to keep fear at bay. Either way, the results were the same. Courage was warmth. The ice begins to close again at the edges of the ship's wake. The men redouble their efforts, hacking at the encroaching slabs before they can trap the hull. The sound grows steady and rhythmic. The air fills with flying crystals that catch the sunlight like sparks. For a fleeting moment, it feels as though the crew is surrounded by fire instead of ice. One of the sailors jokes that this is their true forge, a sea of frozen anvils. The others laugh breathlessly, the noise bright and human against the monotone roar of wind. Even laughter creates warmth here. It rolls through the group like a small storm of life. You notice how they take turns, never letting one man tire too long. They move like gears in a single machine. Every motion has purpose, every pause has reason. It is the kind of teamwork that can only come from years of shared hardship. You find yourself swinging an axe beside them, feeling the shock of impact run up your arms, the sudden rush of blood that follows. Pain becomes heat, and heat becomes courage. After hours of labor, the path finally clears. The ship glides free, leaving a long trail of shattered ice behind. The men drop their tools and collapse to the deck, laughing through their exhaustion. Their faces are raw, their hands bleeding, but their eyes shine with satisfaction. They have beaten the sea again. Some scholars studying Viking endurance argue that moments like these forged more than legends, they built identity. To survive together meant to belong to something greater than oneself. That shared struggle created loyalty stronger than any oath. You can see it now in the quiet smiles, in the way they slap each other's shoulders and share water from a single flask. The youngest sailor, too tired to speak, leans against his oar and lets out a long sigh. The steam from his breath twists upward into the cold air. For a second, it looks like smoke rising from a newly kindled fire. The others notice and chuckle softly. One says that every man carries his own hearth, hidden inside his lungs. It is meant as a joke, yet it feels true. The wind softens at last, and the sea opens wider. The sound of breaking ice fades into gentle ripples. The crew settles down, wrapping themselves in cloaks. The silence that follows is deep and peaceful. You look around and realize how strange it is that exhaustion can feel so close to contentment. The body, though aching, glows from within. As dusk approaches, the horizon turns the color of copper. The men stare into it quietly. No one speaks. The broken ice behind them glints in the fading light like scattered glass, proof of the struggle they have endured. The ship rocks gently, and for a moment, it feels almost warm again. You rest your hands on the side of the ship, the wood still trembling faintly from its ordeal. The warmth under your palms is faint but undeniable, born of friction, effort, and will. The Vikings did not need fire to feel alive. Their warmth came from motion, from unity, from defiance. You breathe deeply and feel that same heat pulsing through your chest. The sea is calm once more, but inside you, something still burns. When the night finally falls again, the cold becomes almost beautiful. The air clears until every star glows with sharp precision. The sea reflects them perfectly, so that for a moment it seems you are floating in the middle of the sky. The longship glides forward in silence, its oars raised to rest. The men sit quietly, staring upward. The world feels suspended between frost and light. Then someone murmurs, almost in awe, and points. A green shimmer begins to ripple across the northern horizon. It rises slowly, faint at first, like smoke from a distant fire. Then it spreads, brightening until it fills half the sky with flowing curtains of color. The northern lights have come. The crew watches in complete stillness. Even the dogs lift their heads, eyes reflecting the shifting glow. The colors twist and fold, green melting into pale violet, then into gold. The light moves silently, but it feels alive, as if the sky itself is breathing. The reflection dances across the water, broken only by the gentle motion of the waves. According to ancient sagas, the Norse believed the northern lights were the armor of the Valkyries as they rode across the heavens. Others said they were the glow of souls traveling to Valhalla. Some thought the lights were messages from ancestors, shimmering bridges between the living and the dead. Whatever the truth, every man aboard seems to feel the same quiet reverence. The cold fades from awareness, replaced by a strange warmth rising from within. You can see the glow reflecting on the faces of the crew. The light smooths their features, erasing lines of fatigue. It gives their eyes a kind of childlike wonder. One sailor whispers that it looks like the world's hidden fire spilling out of the sky. Another crosses himself, unsure whether to thank the gods or fear them. Modern scientists explain the northern lights as particles from the sun colliding with the atmosphere. The Vikings, of course, knew nothing of this. But they understood wonder, and wonder has its own kind of heat. Awe fills the air like invisible flame. Even now, as you watch, the chill on your face feels gentler, your breath easier. The lights seem to warm the spirit, if not the body. The helmsman speaks quietly, saying the lights are omens of fortune. He claims that as long as they glow above the ship, no frost can steal a man's courage. The others nod in agreement. The belief is not about protection so much as endurance. They have seen death often enough to know that faith itself can carry weight. One of the younger sailors closes his eyes and hums the melody from the previous night. The rowing chant turned soft and slow. Soon others join, not loudly but just enough to fill the silence. The song merges with the movement of the lights, and for a moment it feels as though the sky is singing back. A few historians studying Norse oral tradition suggest that these moments of shared wonder were vital for morale. The Arctic was a place that could break the human spirit, and beauty was one of the few things that could mend it. When the aurora filled the sky, sailors stopped thinking about cold and danger. They thought about meaning. They thought about home. The colors shift again, growing brighter. The green deepens to emerald, streaked with red at the edges. The water catches the glow and turns to liquid glass. You feel the reflection touch your face, a faint tingle like warmth disguised as light. The sensation is impossible to describe, but utterly real. One of the older men begins to speak softly, reciting a tale his father told him. It is about a warrior who followed the lights across the ice and found a hall where the dead feast forever. The story is simple, but his tone is filled with longing. You can tell it is not a tale of death, but of belonging. The fire in the sky reminds them that somewhere beyond the frost, warmth is eternal. The dogs whine quietly, unsettled by the glow. A sailor strokes one behind the ears and murmurs something soothing. Even the animals seem to sense that this is no ordinary night. The ship drifts slowly, its reflection wrapped in the luminous waves of colour above. A strange peace settles over you. The air feels alive yet still. Every sound, the creak of ropes, the sigh of waves, seems softened. The men speak less and less until only the sound of breathing remains. The aurora moves faster now, folding and unfolding like a vast curtain of silk. The world feels infinite, but you are no longer afraid of its size. Perhaps this is why the Vikings spoke of the heavens as alive. To them, the world was not divided between natural and supernatural. Everything was part of the same breath. The cold, the stars, the sea, and now this glowing fire above all belonged to one body. Standing beneath it, you feel like a single cell within that vast organism. When the lights begin to fade, the crew remains silent. The sky returns to darkness, but the warmth of the moment lingers. The stars reappear, dimmer now, but more numerous. The men lie down without words, cloaks pulled close. You can still see faint traces of green behind your eyelids when you close them, as if the light has burned its memory into you. Historians sometimes say that the Vikings sought not comfort but meaning. Looking at the sky tonight, you understand why. Fire, when it cannot be built, must be imagined, and imagination, when shared, becomes real enough to feel. As you drift into half-sleep, the rhythm of the waves returns. The sea hums softly against the hull, and somewhere inside you, a quiet glow remains. The sky may have gone dark again, but the warmth of that vision still lives behind your ribs. It is the oldest kind of heat, born not of fire, but of wonder. Morning comes without warning, its light soft and cold. The air smells faintly of pine resin and salt. In the distance, dark outlines of land rise slowly through the fog. The men stand at the bow, silent for a while, watching the shore grow closer. After weeks of frozen sea and endless sky, the thought of land feels almost strange. The promise of warmth is so near that it hums in the air like a memory. The helmsman smiles, his cracked lips parting just enough to speak. "Home," he says simply. The word rolls through the crew like music. Shoulders straighten, eyes brighten. The ship moves faster, the oars dipping into the water with renewed strength. The men begin to talk again, voices rising with laughter. Every syllable sounds lighter, as if the cold itself has lost its hold. Soon the scent of wood smoke reaches you. It is faint at first, drifting from the shore ahead, but unmistakable. The smell strikes something deep inside you, something ancient. It is the smell of land, of hearths, of safety. You close your eyes and breathe it in until your chest aches. Around you, the men do the same. According to early Norse writings, the first sight of smoke on the horizon was considered a blessing from the gods. It meant life. It meant that someone, somewhere, had tamed fire and kept it alive through the winter. The returning sailors would take it as a sign that their voyage was protected. For them, warmth was not just comfort, it was proof that the world had not forgotten them. The ship glides into a narrow inlet where snow-covered cliffs rise on either side. Small houses dot the shore, their roofs made of turf and bark. Smoke curls from every chimney, mingling with the mist. People appear at the water's edge, waving and calling out. Dogs bark, their voices echoing across the fjord. The men on the ship wave back, some shouting names, others too choked with relief to speak. As they reach the dock, the sailors begin unloading their gear. You can see how careful they are with every movement, as though afraid to disturb the fragile line between sea and land. The first step onto solid ground feels heavy, almost sacred. The frozen mud gives slightly underfoot, and the sensation of earth rather than water brings a strange comfort. One of the villagers brings a torch closer to guide them. The orange light spills across the men's faces, revealing deep lines and cracked lips. The heat from the flame brushes your skin, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you feel true warmth. It is almost overwhelming. Tears spring to your eyes without warning. The men laugh at each other, some pretending to cough to hide emotion, others simply letting the laughter shake out of them like a thaw. Inside the longhouse, the air is thick with smoke and the smell of pine and roasted meat. The ceiling beams drip with condensed moisture, and the fire at the center crackles and spits. The sound is hypnotic. You can feel the heat wrapping around your body like a heavy cloak. The men gather close to the flames, holding out their hands, their faces glowing red in the light. One of the older women ladles hot broth into wooden bowls. Steam curls upward, carrying the scent of herbs and fat. The men drink greedily, not from hunger but from longing. The taste of warmth is as important as the warmth itself. Someone begins to hum softly. The same rowing chant turned now into a slow lullaby. The rhythm of survival has become the rhythm of peace. Archaeological evidence of Viking longhouses shows how ingeniously they were built for heat. Thick turf walls trapped air like insulation, and central hearths were surrounded by stone to store warmth through the night. Smoke holes in the roof let just enough air escape to feed the fire while keeping most of the heat inside. It was a perfect balance, an ancient art of keeping the frost at the threshold without letting it enter. The fire burns higher as the crew settles in. One sailor stretches out his hands, smiling at the sensation of heat stinging his skin. "I had forgotten what it feels like to sweat," he says, and the others nod in agreement. You can see the frost melting on their cloaks, droplets sliding down to hiss and vanish on the stones near the fire. The sight is strangely satisfying, like watching winter surrender. A curious tradition begins. Each man takes a small piece of wood or charcoal from the hearth and presses it against his palm. The mark it leaves is faint but visible, a tiny black smudge. They say it reminds them of the fire they will carry inside until the next voyage. It is symbolic, but the warmth in the gesture is real. The villagers listen to the stories of their journey, the frozen seas, the singing ice, the faint fire hidden under shields. Children gather near, wide-eyed, as one sailor describes the lights that danced in the sky. Every detail seems to weave a spell. The longhouse becomes a theatre of flame and memory, where survival turns into legend. Later, when the food is gone and the laughter fades, the men sit quietly around the fire. The glow flickers across their faces, turning fatigue into calm. You can feel the steady pulse of heat beneath the smoke, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The storm outside no longer matters. The cold can knock all it wants, but it cannot enter here. Some historians believe that the ritual of gathering around the hearth shaped Viking identity as much as war or exploration. Fire was the one thing that made all effort worthwhile. Watching the men now, you see that truth unfold. They are warriors, traders, survivors, but in this moment, they are simply human beings warming their hands at the center of their world. The night deepens. Outside, the sea groans softly beneath the ice. Inside, laughter returns, quieter now, mingling with the crackle of burning pine. You close your eyes and let the warmth soak through every part of you. After so many days of cold, it feels like rebirth. In that moment, you understand the real secret of Viking endurance. It was not strength alone, or courage, or even ingenuity. It was the memory of the hearth of fire, waiting at journey's end. Every voyage began and ended with flame, the single constant in a world of ice. And as you drift towards sleep, surrounded by its glow, you feel that truth settle gently inside you like embers refusing to die. The following morning arrives with a silence so deep that it feels almost sacred. Outside, the land still sleeps under frost, but inside the longhouse the fire glows softly, painting every wall in tones of amber and gold. The men lie scattered near the hearth, wrapped in cloaks and fur, breathing heavily through the final hours of their rest. The air smells of smoke, pine, and animal fat. Every corner hums with the warmth of a night spent near flame. When the first light seeps through the smoke hole in the roof, a few of the crew begin to stir. They stretch slowly, blinking as the smoke stings their eyes. One of them, his voice hoarse, begins to speak in a low murmur. It is not a story this time, but a memory, something personal. He tells of a night on another voyage, one colder than any before. Half his crew froze before reaching land, but those who lived swore they saw shapes of fire walking on the ice beside them. The others listen quietly, neither mocking nor doubting. In this world, the boundary between memory and myth is thin as a breath. Old stories live beside new ones, and no one needs to ask which are true. They all serve the same purpose: to remind each man why he survived. As the day unfolds, the sailors begin sharing tales of other journeys. Some are funny, others somber. One man claims he once saw frost form patterns on a ship's sail that looked like runes. Another swears that during a storm, lightning struck the mast but did not burn it because their ancestors were guiding them home. These stories are half truth, half prayer, and that combination is what keeps them alive. Legends are how warmth survives long after the fire goes out. Every tale told beside a hearth becomes a new kind of heat, one that cannot be lost to wind or ice. The Vikings understood this better than most. In their culture, stories were not only entertainment but shelter. Words kept the cold at bay when wood and wool failed. One of the younger men leans forward, fascinated. He asks whether Odin ever sent fire down to sailors in danger. The older man chuckles and replies that Odin did not hand out fire. He handed out cleverness. The gods, he says, light a spark in your head, not in your hands. The group laughs softly, nodding. Wisdom in their eyes is its own kind of flame. Some scholars today suggest that the Norse habit of storytelling was a psychological tool as vital as clothing or food. It allowed men to reframe hardship as meaning, transforming suffering into strength. It was a way of keeping the spirit warm, even when the world froze around them. You can feel that warmth spreading through the room now, fed not by logs but by memory. After a while, one man begins a tale that everyone knows but never tires of hearing. The story of a warrior who faced the goddess of winter herself. She tried to freeze his heart, but he tricked her by drinking mead warmed in his own hands until his blood glowed brighter than her ice. He returned home and built a fire that never died, and from that fire, every home in his village was lit. The room falls silent at the end of the story. Even the fire seems to pause, as if listening to its own origin retold. Then, slowly, the men begin to smile. One tosses another log into the hearth. The flames leap higher, crackling with new life. The story has done what it was meant to do. It has rekindled belief. Outside, the morning deepens. The villagers begin their work, leading animals to the pens, carrying buckets of water from the stream. The sailors watch through the narrow windows, still wrapped in their cloaks. The simple rhythm of daily life feels like another kind of fire. The sight of people moving with purpose fills them with quiet peace. You walk to the entrance and push the wooden door open. Cold air rushes in, but it no longer feels cruel. It feels honest. You step outside, the snow crunching under your boots. Smoke from the longhouse rises in lazy spirals, caught briefly by the wind before vanishing into the pale sky. The world is bright and endless, the light bouncing off every surface until it feels like standing inside a mirror. A group of children runs past, laughing, their cheeks pink from the cold. One of them holds a stick with a glowing ember at the end, borrowed from the communal hearth. He waves it like a torch, proud and fearless. Behind him, a woman calls out, but her voice carries more amusement than warning. The child plants the ember in a pile of snow, where it hisses and dies, leaving only a tiny plume of steam. You realize that even here, surrounded by frost, the people play with fire like an old friend. The crew begins preparing to depart again. Their tasks are slower now, gentler. They patch sails, check ropes, and refill barrels. The warmth of the hearth lingers in every motion. They talk quietly of home, of families waiting farther inland, of meals shared around fires that never had to be hidden under shields or carried inside stones. Before leaving, they perform one last custom. Each man takes a small piece of charcoal from the hearth and places it carefully in a leather pouch. It is not for light or cooking. It is symbolic, a fragment of safety to carry into the world. When they sail again, they will bring it aboard, placing it in the sandpit amidships where their secret fire once slept. The act is half ritual, half insurance, a promise that warmth will always find its way back to them. You stand beside the hearth one last time. The flames flicker softly, casting orange light across the stone walls. You can hear the faint hum of the sea outside, the rhythm of the tide returning. You close your eyes and let the heat brush your face, the same heat that carried the Vikings through every frozen night. It feels less like temperature and more like presence, the quiet certainty that life endures. When you step outside again, the sky is pale blue and cloudless. The men are already boarding the ship. You follow, the sound of boots thudding softly on wood. Behind you, the smoke from the longhouse drifts upward, curling into the cold air like a final blessing. The memory of fire stays with you, faint but steady, a living thread connecting everything that breathes. The new voyage begins at dawn. Frost glazes the ship's planks, and the water laps softly against the hull, whispering the familiar rhythm of departure. The village fades behind you, its columns of smoke curling into the pale sky. The men row in silence for a while, their movements steady, almost tender. The sea accepts them again like an old friend. The air is cold enough to sting, but the memory of the hearth still clings to their clothes. Every man carries a pouch at his belt, each one holding a fragment of charcoal from the longhouse fire. They treat it with the same care they would give to a weapon or a relic. It is both symbol and safeguard, a promise that they carry light within them no matter where they go. As the ship drifts into open water, the sunlight hits the sea in long ribbons of silver. The world feels endless once more, but this time, the cold no longer seems hostile. It feels like a test they already know how to pass. The crew begins to talk softly, their voices weaving in and out of the sound of the waves. They speak of what they have learned how to find warmth in motion, in song, in belief, in one another. One sailor pulls out his pouch and tips a single black fragment into his hand. It looks small and lifeless, yet when the sun touches it, it gleams faintly. He closes his fist and grins. "Still warm," he says, and everyone smiles. The simple act of speaking those words seems to make them true. Historians who study Norse ritual often note how symbolism shaped survival. For the Vikings, every action carried meaning. To carry a piece of burned wood from a fire was not superstition, it was continuity. It meant that the past travelled with them, that warmth could cross the sea even when flames could not. As the day brightens, a gentle wind rises. The sail fills, snapping once before, settling into a steady pull. The men adjust ropes and knots, their hands moving with practiced ease. You can see the wool wrappings still clinging to the oars, dark with tar and oil. Everything on the ship has purpose. Every surface holds memory. The warmth that began as fire has now become routine woven into every gesture, every habit of survival. A group of gulls follows in the ship's wake, their cries sharp against the sky. The men toss them bits of dried fish, laughing as the birds dive and squabble. Laughter, once rare on this voyage, now feels natural. It rolls through the air like a breeze. Warmth is no longer something they chase. It lives in the moments between words. One of the older men begins humming again, the same chant that once kept time during their darkest nights. But now it sounds softer, almost playful. Others join in, turning work into music. The sound carries across the water, mixing with the wind. The rhythm feels lighter this time, less about endurance, more about balance. A curious fact found in Old Norse poetry suggests that sailors often sang at both the start and end of a journey, but the tone changed completely. The first songs were for courage, the last for gratitude. What began as a fight for life ended as a hymn to peace. Listening to them now, you feel that truth unfold. Their voices are calm, content. They sing not to survive, but to remember. By midday, the sun stands high, pale but generous. The deck has dried, and the ice on the ropes melts into droplets that sparkle like beads. The men remove their gloves to stretch their fingers, and steam rises faintly from their skin. The scene feels almost warm, though the air remains biting cold. You realize that temperature has ceased to define their comfort. What matters now is rhythm, breath, and trust. One sailor begins carving another rune into the railing. He works slowly, his knife tracing delicate lines. You recognize the symbol, it is the same one for warmth carved before, the breath of life. When he finishes, he presses a thumb over the groove and nods. He does not say a word. No one needs to. The act alone is enough. A scholar once wrote that Vikings saw the sea not as an enemy but as a mirror of themselves. It could freeze or flow, rage or rest, but it always moved. To be alive, they believed, was to keep moving. You feel that lesson in every shift of the ship, every creak of the planks. The cold may never end, but neither does the motion that defies it. As afternoon fades, clouds gather on the horizon. The men notice but do not rush. They know what storms mean now. The sky darkens slowly, the wind turning colder. Someone ties down loose ropes while another checks the sail. The dogs curl together. The goat stamps its hooves nervously. The first drops of snow fall soft and soundless. The helmsman looks to the crew and smiles faintly. "It will pass," he says, and the others nod. He is right. The storm comes without fury, a quiet snowfall that wraps the world in white. The ship drifts through it like a dream, the sound of the water muted beneath a blanket of silence. The men pull their cloaks tighter, huddling together in calm familiarity. Snow gathers on the deck, but no one scrambles to clear it. They let it rest for a while, knowing it will melt with their movement. Their warmth now comes not from fire or trick, but from understanding the knowledge that even cold has rhythm, that it too can be endured if faced with patience. You sit beside them, feeling the slow roll of the ship beneath you. The world has narrowed to this small space of breath and wood and snow. The air smells clean, sharp, alive. When you look up, the clouds are breaking again, revealing a streak of pale light. The men lift their heads to see it, their faces glowing softly in the fading Sunday. For a long time, no one speaks. They do not need to. The lesson of warmth has been learned, written into muscle and bone. It does not live in fire alone, but in will, in rhythm, in the quiet certainty that life will always find its heat again. The day ends with that light still on their faces. The wind quiets, the snow fades, and the ship sails onward into calm waters. You close your eyes and feel the steady pulse of motion, the heart of warmth beating quietly beneath the frost. By the next morning, the storm has faded completely, leaving the world clear and bright. The sky glows a pale gold near the horizon, and the water is calm enough to mirror it perfectly. Frost still clings to the edges of the sail, but it glitters now instead of biting. The men move quietly, almost reverently, as though afraid to disturb the rare stillness. Every sound, the dip of an oar, the shuffle of boots on wood feels amplified. The sea around you is vast, but the ship seems smaller in a comforting way, like a single heartbeat moving through an endless body. You realize that every plank, every knot, every tool bears the imprint of human touch. This vessel is not just a machine, it is a memory made solid. It carries within it everything that has been learned about warmth, endurance, and faith. The helmsman steers gently, his hands steady on the tiller. His beard is streaked with frost, but his eyes are bright. He hums softly to himself, a tune too low to recognize, perhaps something his father sang long ago. The sound merges with the rhythm of the sea until it is impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. Historians often describe Viking voyages as feats of bravery. But watching the men now, bravery feels too small a word. What they practice is patience, the courage to keep moving when nothing promises comfort. Every choice they make, from the tar on the oars to the fur beneath their cloaks, is a testament to understanding rather than defiance. They do not fight the cold anymore, they negotiate with it. One of the younger sailors begins to laugh suddenly. He points toward the horizon where a group of seals basks on an ice floe. The animals lift their heads lazily, unbothered by the cold, their bodies glistening in the light. The men laugh with him, admiring their serenity. For a moment, it feels like they are looking at a reflection of themselves, creatures perfectly shaped for their world. A curious idea found in later Nordic writings suggests that sailors sometimes envied the seal, calling it the warmest of the cold-born. Its fat and fur were symbols of balance, proof that warmth could exist even in ice. The men joke now about turning into seals themselves, living in the sea without worry. Their laughter ripples across the deck, soft and genuine. The dog, near the prow, barks once, breaking the calm. The sound echoes strangely, rolling across the open water. Then it stops, and silence returns. The crew grows still again, not from fear but from awe. The sea is so smooth that even small ripples seem sacred. In that silence, you can hear the faint creak of the hull expanding under sunlight. The warmth of day is returning, slow but sure. One sailor removes his gloves and presses his palms flat against the deck. Steam rises faintly from the wood where his skin touches it. "Alive," he whispers, and the others nod. The ship, it seems, is alive in truth. Its warmth comes from motion and from the lives it carries. You feel that same pulse beneath your fingers, a subtle rhythm, steady and enduring. Researchers examining the preserved hulls of Viking ships have noted something remarkable. The wood fibers in oak and pine, once soaked with oil and salt, retain traces of elasticity for centuries. This flexibility gave the ships their strength, but it also trapped heat, however faint. A longship could stay slightly warmer inside than the air around it, the wood itself holding on to the memory of friction and Sunday. Even nature seemed to conspire with human will to preserve warmth. As the day wears on, the men share the last of their dried meat and pour what remains of the mead into a single cup. The helmsman raises it, and the rest follow his gesture. He says a few quiet words, nothing formal, just a wish for steady winds and safe passage home. The cup passes from hand to hand, each man taking a sip. When it reaches you, the mead tastes faintly of honey and salt, sunlight caught in liquid form. One of the older sailors begins to tell a story about his youth, about how he once believed fire lived inside the sea itself. He had watched lightning strike the waves and saw blue flames dance across the surface. To him, that was proof that even water could burn if treated with respect. The men listen, amused and thoughtful. Perhaps he is exaggerating, but perhaps not. The ocean hides its own mysteries, and the Vikings have always been its students as much as its conquerors. The afternoon stretches quietly. The sun drifts higher, melting thin sheets of ice into rippling paths. The men take turns resting, heads bowed, their faces softened by exhaustion. Some sleep sitting up, hands still wrapped around oar handles as if afraid to let go. The warmth that fills the air now is gentle, a mix of sunlight, breath, and shared presence. It is not enough to forget the cold, but enough to live with it. The helmsman glances toward you and smiles. "We used to chase fire," he says, "but now we carry it." His words linger, settling into the hum of the sea. It is the truest thing anyone has said all voyage. A few clouds drift in from the west, their edges glowing gold. The wind shifts slightly, cooler again, but no one seems to mind. They pull their cloaks closer, adjust their footing, and continue forward. The ship moves with a steady grace, its timbers groaning softly, its shadow long and dark across the glittering surface. By evening, the horizon burns orange and red. The light reflects on the water until it seems the whole sea is on fire. The men pause to watch. No one speaks. The reflection stretches endlessly, a river of flame flowing beneath the ship. For a moment, it feels as if the Vikings have finally found the warmth they were searching for, not in fire or oil or skin, but in the beauty of the world itself. When the last light fades, the stars return, cold and bright. The men lower the sail, letting the ship drift in quiet rhythm. You lie back against the deck, feeling the faint warmth of the sun still caught in the wood. The sea sighs softly beneath you, a lullaby older than language. It occurs to you that perhaps this is what the Vikings always understood, that warmth is not a place or a possession but a practice, something found and lost and found again in every moment of motion and breath. The ship rocks gently, the sky stretches forever, and within this vast cold, life still glows. Night returns slowly, slipping across the sky like a tide. The water beneath the ship darkens until it blends with the heavens, and the air grows sharp once more. Frost begins to form on the edges of the ropes and the tips of the oars. Yet the men do not huddle this time. They move easily, their motions calm, their breaths even. The cold no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like part of the rhythm, something to acknowledge but not to fear. The ship glides on, steady as a heartbeat. The men speak softly now, their voices carrying over the still water. They talk about what awaits them at home, about the smell of pine smoke in their halls, about the laughter of children, the weight of furs across their shoulders, the taste of warm broth thick with herbs. Every story shared is another spark. The air fills with quiet heat. You sit among them, watching the stars multiply until they cover the whole sky. The Milky Way stretches above like a frozen river, gleaming with impossible brightness. One of the sailors points at it and says, "It is the road to the gods." Another says, "It is the ash trail left by the first fire that ever burned." Their words drift together until they sound like a prayer. According to fragments of Norse myth, the world began in the meeting of fire and ice, the two forces whose balance created all things. The Vikings lived inside that balance every day, walking the edge between heat and frost. They did not seek to conquer either side, but to live between them. The sea taught them that truth better than any book or sermon could. A curious fact recorded in later folklore claims that some captains carried small mirrors made of polished bronze. At sunrise, they would catch the first light and flash it toward the sea, as if signaling to the sun itself. It was said that this simple act invited warmth into the day. Whether it worked or not, the idea feels beautiful. To greet the light before it arrives is to show gratitude for what sustains you. The helmsman now stands quietly at the stern, his cloak fluttering in the wind. His face is turned toward the horizon, where a faint pale glow hints at dawn. He looks older than he did before, but peaceful. The others rest where they sit, their bodies relaxed, their minds finally still. The dogs sleep between them, curled close, breathing slow and deep. The goat shifts its hooves and sighs. The ship itself creaks softly, like a great animal dreaming. The first hint of sunrise spills across the water. It begins as a thin line of gold, then spreads, touching every frozen surface with light. The frost that covered the ropes and shields begins to melt, turning into glittering beads that slide and fall. The air smells of salt and wood and the faint sweetness of thawing tar. You can taste warmth in the air before you feel it on your skin. No one speaks. They simply watch as the light climbs higher, painting the sea with color. The glow reaches their faces, softening the lines of hardship. For a long time, nothing exists but the quiet miracle of the sun returning to its place. Modern researchers sometimes describe endurance as a physical adaptation, a test of muscle and energy. But what you see here feels deeper than biology. It is something in the spirit, the quiet refusal to let the world dictate your peace. The Vikings found warmth not because they possessed great strength, but because they learned to create it, moment by moment, in every form it could take. The helmsman lifts his face to the light, eyes closed. "We never sail the same sea twice," he murmurs, "and it never freezes the same way." The others nod. The words hang in the air like breath before dissolving. They mean everything and nothing at once, but everyone understands. The sun rises fully now, spilling gold across the deck. The wood gleams, and the men begin to stir. Someone laughs softly, stretching his arms toward the light. Another starts to hum the old rowing chant, this time slower, lighter, like a cradle song. The sound blends with the rhythm of the sea until it feels like part of the earth itself. You close your eyes, letting the sound and the warmth and the motion carry you. The journey feels endless, yet somehow complete. The cold has not vanished, but it no longer matters. It has become part of you, balanced by the warmth that has never left. And so the Vikings sail onward, their ship a moving hearth, their breath a quiet fire. They have learned what few ever do, that warmth is not found but made, not given but remembered. Every wave that rocks them forward is proof that life persists, even in the hardest places. The sea stretches to infinity, shimmering in the morning light. The men row slowly, their faces calm, their eyes bright. The sun climbs higher, and the frost disappears completely. You feel the air against your skin cold, yes, but kind. The longship cuts through the water like a pulse, its wake shining like melted gold. You breathe deeply and realize that the story is no longer about survival, but about understanding. Fire is not only in the hearth or the sun or the forge, it is in breath, in faith, in memory. The Vikings carried it across oceans, not to conquer the cold, but to live with it in harmony. The horizon glows brighter. The ship sails toward it without hurry, steady and sure. The sound of oars fades into the calm. The light rests gently on every face. The world is quiet. The warmth remains. The sea drifts into silence. The light softens, and the rhythm of the waves slows until it feels like breathing. You can hear only the soft creak of the wood beneath you, and the faint murmur of water brushing against the hull. The air is cool again, but it no longer feels cruel. It feels like an old friend, quiet and familiar. You close your eyes and let yourself drift with the ship. Every sound grows slower, deeper. The distant calls of gulls fade into nothing. The smell of salt lingers, mingled with the faint sweetness of pine and smoke. Your body feels heavy, your thoughts lighter, as though they too are floating. In this stillness, you can almost imagine the warmth of those Viking fires, hidden flames glowing under shields, the soft heat of fur, the slow breath of sleeping men. You picture their faces calm in the darkness, their faith in morning unshaken. The same rhythm that carried them across frozen seas now carries you towards sleep. Breathe slowly. The air is clear. The sea is calm. Each exhale lets go of what the day carried in. Each inhale brings back a trace of light. The stars above are distant, but patient. The ship drifts onward, steady, eternal. Somewhere in the quiet, you can almost hear the echo of oars dipping into water, the song of endurance turned into a lullaby. Let the sound fade now. Let the light dim. The warmth remains, small and steady, waiting for you in the dark. Good night.